Title: Survivor Deviation Unlimited. Author: Ji Chu. Copy: in the server called The Shrine, a game of the highest class has officially started. In the human game of alliance, betrayal, and intrigue, survival is the only logic. After the smoke has passed, only the survivors can speak. The amnesia and Wuju opened his eyes, and the people around him were shot in the head, blood spattered on his wrist, which almost exposed the mechanical joints. When he was confused about everything around him and the fear of others, the implanted projector in his brain was activated, and the floating green font was output in front of him like a code. Variable name, and Wuju attribute, male, 20 years old. Game rounds, 5. Win rate, 100/100. Hazard class, SSS. The first time she saw in Wuju, Shen Ti knew that he could not survive in this game. The simplicity and fragility in those eyes were not fake. Until you see the other side of this person being activated, the alienation that comes at your fingertips, the gamble at all costs, the more excited you are on the verge of death, and you can even count yourself in order to win. Shen Ti realized that it was his cognition that had gone wrong. It's okay, he's not a normal person anyway. The king of tricks/angels and lunatics switch at any time /true essence 1. The setting of Shao will switch between angels and monsters for some reasons, but not a dual personality, he is always himself, and the memory before and after the switch is constantly archived. 2. It is not an infinite stream of ghosts, gods, and aliens. There are many strategic and psychological warfare. 3. Not suitable for friends who like moral benchmarking protagonists. 4. No head change, please do not infringe. 5. If you have applied some game theory knowledge, welcome to discuss, please do not copy it. The first copy refers to the board game Lifeboat, which has been authorized by the producer. Content tags: Strong Love Unlimited Stream Future Overhead Search Keywords, Protagonist, and Wuju, Acceptance, Shen Ti, Attack, Supporting Roles, Many Handsome Guys and Beauties. Others, 1 sentence introduction, dedicate the real chaos and madness to the altar. Intention: moderate games are good for the brain, addicted to games hurts the body. Pay attention to self-protection and beware of being deceived. VIP Metal and Wujiao, who lost his memory, woke up and found himself entering a dangerous virtual game, The Altar. In order to return to reality alive and meet his dying mother, he had to step into this dangerous situation of intrigue, break through the levels and accumulate points. Here he met a special mysterious person, Shen Ti, and together with him, he found the meaning of survival. The article is composed of short stories constructed one level after another, interlocking each other, eulogizing the preciousness of love, friendship, and affection. The fantasy world is full of shadows of reality, thought-provoking and full of fun. A red laser beam moved to the forehead of the man beside him. With a thud, the semi-viscous plasma mixture splattered onto his wrist. This is the first scene in front of him when he wakes up, and it's as bad as a nightmare. With a blank mind, he sat on the chair and stared at the man whose head was shot and fell to the ground. This man's eyes were just like his own, and they were wide open. This is the result of trying to forcefully leave the altar. Accompanied by the noise in his brain that resembled a dissonant signal, he heard a very holy voice, like singing in a church. He found that his reflexes were abnormally slow, and it took a lot of effort to even shift his gaze to his wrist. Glossy silver bone gaps go. My hands are shaking and I can't control it. The black t-shirt on his body seems to have been stained with a lot of blood, but he can't see clearly. Looking around, there are a few unknown people around, facing the people who died in front of them. Each person's expression is different. Some people can see obvious fear on their faces, while others are only left numb. When he cast his eyes, several of them avoided their eyes, as if they were afraid to meet him. I wanted to see these faces more clearly, but the vision seemed to be immersed in water, and the eyes were sore. The next second, tears rolled down without warning. He raised his hands to dry them in confusion. The voice came again. Congratulations to the survivors for entering this round of the game. Let's settle the results of the previous game first. Alternatively, you can meet a new round of friends. As soon as he finished speaking, he heard a very subtle sound from the white noise in his brain, and the next second, a virtual holographic projection panel appeared in the left field of vision, which seemed to be about own information, variable name, Anwuju attribute, male, 20 years old, game rounds, 5. Win rate, 100/100, hazard class, SSS. Seeing these 3 words, a huge amount of information is poured into the brain like an overload of data in an instant, the face of this world and the way it works deformed, all the memories from birth to adulthood, every day on the street. A passing face, a chaotic red light district, artificial blue skies and endless acid rain. The huge amount of information made Anwuju breathless. A new projection panel appeared on the right side of the angle of view, showing that he had obtained 10,000 holy coins. All the first impressions begin to piece together some outlines of the matter. He seems to have entered a game where the winner can settle for the so-called holy coins, and lose the game. Thinking of the man who just fell to the ground, he just didn't follow the rules, and the result of losing is probably the same. The 5 senses are real, and he can clearly sense the pain caused by the injury. Is this some new virtual reality game? Soon, Anwuju realized that his amnesia seemed to be less conventional, more like it had been edited artificially, with only part of it missing. He remembers his time in a world where administrative structures were disintegrating, national borders were blurred, and almost anyone could become a commodity. He even recalls the handful of people at the top, the business giants big enough to stomp the state machine under their feet. What about himself? All the pictures in my memory are so warm, they are the real and clear first perspective, and they all have the same person. The beautiful and gentle woman hugged him as a child, put him to sleep, taught him to read and write, and smiled at him. This is his mother. From childhood to adulthood, all the memories associated with it, the love he truly received, flowed back into this body. The mother at the bedside seemed to be trying to tell him something. The screen starts shaking and everything becomes distorted. She pursed her lips, and the sound she made was completely drowned out by the shrill noise in Anwu's head. Passively pulled away from the memory fragment, Anwuju was in constant pain, the veins in the neck burst out, and the temples were still beating faintly. He wondered if the hippocampus in his brain had been destroyed, or something else had been inserted. Anwuju wanted to check to see if there is a neural interface on his body, there must be some kind of microprocessor stuck in it, but the severely injured right hand was difficult to lift, probably because the bone was broken, and the hand was still shaking. He raised his left hand and stretched it behind his ears and back of his head, only to realize that his hair had grown to the level of his waist, but he had no idea. I really don't want to make my hands tremble like this, Anwuju bit the tip of his right finger, frowned, and caught a glimpse of a guy wearing a mask. This man is standing furthest away from him. He is tall and wears a black trench coat. He looks like a young man. He did not show his true face. He wore a mechanical mask made of some synthetic material on his head. The surface was as smooth and white as the long-lost sweet white glaze, with a warm luster, but the mask retained traces of block splicing. The front of the mask is the appearance of guanyin, the eyes are lowered, the corners of the mouth are slightly raised, the center of the upper eyebrows is a little red, the assembly line divided horizontally and vertically and the metal buckles connecting the back of the head, let this guanyin like producing a subtle sense of fragmentation and mechanics. Can't seem to touch the interface, Anwuju put down his left hand. He was very puzzled about everything here. He remembers every bit of his relationship with his mother, the process of his growth, the early death of his father, his dependence on his mother, and a lovely sister. At this time, I should accompany my mother in the ward, why am I here? As before the official battle begins, we have a warm-up game for you. Survivors who win the warm-up game can gain a game advantage or the right to choose a single player or team format. The white void in front of me began to flicker when the sound appeared, such as a color bar flashing when the screen failed. In front of them appeared a round table with 8 surrounding high chairs. "Please take a seat." Others followed the instructions and took their seats, and Wuju didn't want to be shot to death when he didn't understand, so he also sat down as required. The moment I sat down, digital pulse bars and highly saturated color afterimage appeared on the surrounding pure white background. After the flashing, they were on the rooftop of a skyscraper. The dark sky was dazzled by the mixed neon beams. The aircraft, the tracks strayed near the high-rise buildings, and the holographic projections of advertisements as many as pollution were dizzying. And Wuju felt that his eyesight was also damaged. He narrowed his eyes slightly under the light stimulation. He could still see part of the huge holographic projection 30 to 40 meters high in his field of vision. It was a virtual beaded head Huadan, leaning against a skyscraper. They are at the top of the world, and all they can see is the bustling light and sound, the gutter without the chemicals floating in the slums, the piles of discarded prosthetics and the rotten corners, a dead body that no one cares about. Looking back, the people at the round table looked at each other, each with their own insecurities. Compared with the sensual dogs and horses outside, the place looked much simpler. 8 people, 8 seats, and the table in front of each seat was embedded with one display screen and nothing else. At least not a game that requires force to decide the outcome. And Wuju thinks about his injury and looks at others. The other 7 people are of different ages. At first glance, they don't have the same characteristics to be selected. From right to left, they are a young woman wearing a cheongsam, a strong man, a blonde old man with a Western face, a man wearing a mechanical guanyin mask, a thin middle-aged man in a suit, a boy with freckles on his cheeks and black-rimmed glasses, and a red-haired boy who looked only 15 or 16 years old. And Wuju frowned. Why am I the only one injured so badly? The noise in his head was getting louder and louder, causing him a headache. He turned his face and looked to his left. Sit on his left is the boy who looks very small, with red hair like fire, wearing a loose and worn baseball jacket and a black hat. He looks very good, nice to get along with. His eyes were large, staring at the old Rubik's Cube that kept turning in his hand. And Wuju almost instinctively began to observe, seeing his 2 feet on the edge of the chair, the whole person flexed, the fingers are flexible, there is no thick calluses, the body is thin, the arm muscles are not obvious. It should be not very good at fighting and using weapons. And Wuju stretched out his left hand towards him. Hello. He wanted to say get to know me, but the moment he opened his mouth, he found that his speaking rhythm was very problematic, as if he had a language barrier. The boy was stunned, holding his Rubik's Cube in both hands. His fingers were still, like a bionic rabbit that was simulating eating but stuck. What's wrong? And Wuju said softly. He didn't think his attitude was scary, not to mention he hid his right hand under the table. The boy's eyes showed defensiveness and he didn't answer, but An Wuju saw him glance uneasily at a middle-aged man with glasses sitting diagonally opposite. At the end of the line of sight, the man looked at least 40 years old, his cheeks were sunken, and his eyes were shrewd. What's the matter? Without waiting for An Wuju to say anything, the middle-aged man pushed the glasses on the bridge of his nose, folded his arms, a very typical defensive posture. And Wuju, you have killed so many people because of your ruthlessness, now pretending to be innocent, do you think anyone will believe you? After speaking, the rest of the people at the table also looked at An Wuju, as if they were waiting for something. I don't remember. An Wuju answered truthfully, speaking very slowly, and the punctuation was not quite right. In the eyes of other people, this long-haired man has a perfect skin, but he is so beautiful that he is natural, without the slightest artificial feeling. He was fair-skinned, as clean as the moon over the city when there was no pollution, but his face was poor and his lips were pale. His eyes were pure and soft, slightly out of focus, his fingers trembled slightly. He felt frightened, but it seemed not. The trembling looked more like anxiety or other mental disorders. This look doesn't look like the bad embryo in Yang Ming's mouth, let alone someone who can win in the altar. An Wuju looked down and thought. Judging from the boy's reaction just now, Long before the man opened his mouth to say these words, the people here had already recognized the fact that Enwuju is very dangerous. Whether the man is telling the truth or not, this situation is not good for him. The middle-aged man sneered, "This time you are pretending to have amnesia." He put his hand on the table, raised his eyebrows, and said word by word, "Don't take people for fools. You guy is really stubborn, and it was the same before." With a beautiful face, he pretended not to know how pure he was, and he attracted others to form an alliance. For this description, Enwuju has a sense of disconnection that does not belong to him, and feels a little helpless. But he noticed that the mechanical Avalakai Tesvara on the opposite side leaned forward, as if he was very interested in the accusation against him. This seems to be the first time he has seen this person move since he came in, otherwise he would suspect that the other person is a machine. The middle-aged man put his hand on the table into a fist. "I met him in the last round, and that round was a gambling house." Enwuju vowed that he could save everyone's life. Let a lot of people join his camp, but in the end he figured out the rules himself but didn't tell everyone. In his words, there was a trembling in his voice, which seemed to be because of fear. He pointed at Enwujiao excitedly, "If you don't believe me, you can check the holy coins that he settled in the last round, it must be 10 times more than mine." After these words, Enwuju felt more and more bad. "Is your last round so fierce?" These words came from the right side of Enwuju. He turned his face, and on his right sat a young woman in a pink cheongsam, with a snake-shaped necklace around her neck, beautiful and moving, and thick and beautiful black curly hair, exuding natural, rather than artificial, sheen is rare in this day and age. The corner of her mouth was smiling, she stared at the nail polish on her fingertips, then turned to look at Enwuju, trembling deliberately, "It's terrible, it seems that handsome guys can't believe it." Enwuju had some thoughts because of her last sentence. The battle is so fierce, the people who also survived should not be easy. In any case, the winner of this game can't be blameless. The rest of us must pull together to get him out first, or anyone could fall victim to him. He spoke loudly, and the others fell silent for a while, as if tacitly. Enwuju knew that what he said at this moment was useless. Because it's a really exciting proposition. Although the next game and rules are unclear, it is of course the best to be able to erect a public target, otherwise the muzzle is likely to go to any of them. At this moment, the voice reappeared, "Since everyone is seated, let's get acquainted with each other's names first." As soon as the voice fell, a blue light appeared in front of everyone, and the light gradually transformed into characters, which were their respective names. From Enwuju's point of view, his name was suspended in the rich night, almost overlapping with the name of the person on the opposite side. The cacophony in my head paused for a moment. Shen Ti, it is the mysterious mechanical Guanyin. Volume 1 warm-up game guessing numbers. It turned out to be the blame. The boy beside him finally spoke. Enwuju turned his face, and caught a small expression of satisfied curiosity on his too cold face. His name was also suspended, Wu Yu. "Ah, I'm also curious about this." The beauty on the right also spoke, with the words Zhong Yuro floating in front of her. She rested her chin with her palm and tapped her fingernails on her cheek. "This name doesn't look like a poor man who will come to the competition at all. She wears berry-colored lipstick, her eyes are big and beautiful, your neck." Zhong Yuro stretched out her finger and pointed to the side of Enwugui's neck, and moved closer. "This flower, is it tattooed?" "Flower." Enwuju bowed his head. Seeing that he couldn't see, Zhong Yuro spread out her left palm and placed it in front of Enwuju, with a small round mirror embedded in her palm. "Here, this white one is pretty good looking." From the reflection of the mirror, Enwuju found a large cluster of flowers on his neck. The snow-white slender edge outlines the blooming shape, the petals are complex, layer upon layer, obliquely upward from the left clavicle, winding all the way to the back of the right ear. But he doesn't seem to have any of these flowers in his memory. "I don't remember either." Enwuju put his fingers on it, rubbed the skin red, but couldn't get it off. Is it really a tattoo? Peony. Wu Yu on the side interjected, but quickly added in a low voice, it seems to be. Zhong Yuro was very surprised, peony? Have you ever seen a peony flower? Now this ornamental flower is almost extinct. In this world of land and water pollution, not to mention ornamental vegetation, there is not much soil for food crops to grow. Wu Yu pursed her lips, my mother. As if he felt that he had said something wrong, he stopped and explained perfunctorily, my family has a collection. Zhong Yuro felt even more strange after hearing this, what kind of rich and noble family are you? Fake. Wu Yu pressed the brim of his hat, lying on the table with his hands folded, artificial. I see. The doubts on Zhong Yuro's face did not disappear completely. She put away her small mirror and observed the skin on An Wuju's neck again, and said to herself, it doesn't look like a tattoo, it doesn't look like an artificial skin. An Wuju didn't think about the strange peony pattern on his body anymore, after all, he has lost his memory now, and thinking about it is useless. He bowed his head slightly, and caught a glimpse of Zhong Yuro's cheongsam, revealing the straps on her legs. The skin on her left calf is not the same as the other parts. It should be a whole piece of artificial grafted skin, made of shark cartilage polysaccharide, which is eerily smooth. In addition, she carried a roll-shaped bag diagonally behind her. The index and middle fingers of both hands had thin calluses, and there were slight knife wounds on the sides of the fingers, which were very sharp, the slender shape that can only be created by a knife. The nails are very short and red nail polish is applied, and a little black thing is rubbed on the end of the little finger. Oil? The voice sounded again, and Wuju stopped observing. This warm-up game is called, and the rules are very simple. A holographic projection is projected on the desktop, which is a display screen with 8 numbers constantly rotating. Among the 100 natural numbers from 1 to 100, each of you needs to take one of them and write it with your finger on the handwriting screen in front of you. The rotation on the 8 displays stopped, 8 numbers appeared at random, and then a new number appeared above the 8 displays. Sum the 8 numbers and divide by 8, to get a mean. The one who is closest to 1/2 of the real average will be the winner of the warm-up game and enjoy the advantage of the official game and the right to decide the competition system. Give everyone 5 minutes to think and write down your answers in 5 minutes. The timer begins then. The countdown number appeared on the round table, which instantly became 4 minutes and 59 seconds, and kept decreasing. The noise that had just subsided appeared again, and Wu Ju's forehead was soaked with cold sweat, and his hands began to tremble again. He took his hand under the table and tried to clench it tightly, only to hear a brawny man on the opposite side say, I actually got a math problem for Lao Tzu. And Wu Ju stared at the brawny man who just spoke. His name was Lu Jingui. He looked quite old, at least 30 years old, but he dressed like a gangster, with many arms on his arms, small pinholes. Both fists are covered with metal exoskeletons, but the material is average. The eyeball in the orbital bone was atrophied and grey. Wu Yu is still playing the Rubik's Cube in his hand, bowing his head without raising his eyelids. Have you never even learned arithmetic? These words were bad, and Lu Jingui was immediately irritated by him. Can you talk, kid? He glanced at the ill-fitting old clothes on Wu Yu's body. Do you think you are like this? Does he look like someone who went to school? This world is completely capitalized. Capitalists who occupy nearly 90% of the world's wealth enjoy and waste excess resources, including education. The essence of class solidification is to master the cognitive ability of the lower class, so the compulsory education system for all has long since disappeared. Basic mathematics education is expensive, and a complete system of basic subject education has discouraged many poor people, not to mention physics, astronomy, or artificial intelligence. Want to understand the nature of the world? You have money. Wu Yu rolled her eyes, at least I'm not illiterate. Well, I'm sorry to interrupt everyone. A boy who looked dull, wore glasses and freckled couldn't help but persuade him, it's just guessing the number, it's a difficult question, let's not quarrel. The name floating in front of him is Ueno Taisei, a Japanese. Judging by the mouth shape, it seems that he speaks Japanese, but what Enwuju hears is Chinese. Ueno's words did not make Lu Jingwei relieved, but the other party poured his anger on him. What are you talking about, a poor who can't even afford implantable glasses? I'm sorry. Ueno's words came to his mouth and he swallowed again, embarrassedly pushing the old glasses on the bridge of his nose that he had used for several years. What he said is not wrong. It's not difficult. Shenjian said it just now, and finally compare it with the average of 1/2 of the sum of all numbers. Zhong Yuro smiled coquettishly. Chiao pointed at the people on the table one by one, you choose 10, you choose 20, and so on. She turned to look at Enwuju, and pointed at him with her long fingers. Finally, if it comes to you, if you choose 8 people, the final average is 45, take 1/2, that is, the people who choose 22 and 23 are the closest. After finishing speaking, Zhong Yuro smiled, it's not difficult to calculate, but who can guess which number each other will choose? That's right. The middle-aged man Yang Ming, who had been targeting Enwuju, said, this warm-up game is also strange, it's all based on luck. Enwuju stared at his face, this man can hide his tone when he speaks, but the subtle expressions on his face are not hidden well enough. What does Mr. Yang do? Zhong Yuro smiled and turned the topic to an irrelevant direction, but it coincided with what Enwuju thought, I feel like you are wearing a tie. Shirts, compared to the rest of us, are a lot more serious. Her tone was teasing and joking, and it really didn't sound serious. This is a great observation point. Enwuju silently watched everyone in his sight. Wu Yu didn't react much, he still played the Rubik's Cube. Lu Jingwei looked like he was watching a play, he was very interested in the hints of beautiful women. The old man held a pen in his hand, he didn't seem to care too much this sentence, just thinking for himself. The freckled man with glasses glanced at Zhong Yuro timidly. Enwuju's observation eyes fell on the face of the mechanical Guanyin directly opposite him, but found that the other party was facing him with the Guanyin statue, motionless, and seemed to be staring at him. Office worker is good. Zhong Yuro smiled brightly, we want to be an office worker in our society, I don't know how highly educated, the competition is so great. She seemed to feel hot, deliberately unbuttoning the top button of his cheongsam. When I saw you, I thought you looked like a white-collar worker, the kind of financial industry. Enwuju stared at Yang Ming, his alert was obviously lowered, the corners of his mouth that had been tensed up slightly, his thin cheeks seemed to be full of these flattering remarks. It's okay, it's not so exaggerated. He did not deny Zhong Yuro's guess. Aware of this, Enwujiao tilted his head in thought, but when he regained his senses, he found that the masked guy sitting directly opposite was staring at him. Wu Yu, who was beside him, didn't stop playing the Rubik's Cube, and only mumbled, who will come to the altar if you mix well. Wu Yu sat on the left of an old man who had been silent for a long time. His white blonde hair was like haggard, and he looked at least 60 years old, but his physique was still strong. Enwuju didn't notice him until he opened his mouth. There are only 3.5 minutes left in 5 minutes, won't you talk more about games? He has a Western face, and his mouth seems to be French, but like Ueno, they can directly hear Chinese. The name projected in front of him is the word Lao Yu, and there is no foreign name. What are you talking about? Yang Ming's tie was crooked, and he glanced at Lao Yu. Could it be that you want us to report all the numbers to be filled in, and then write them down after you have calculated them? Is it possible? Lu Jingwei laughed. Yang Ming's expression was very relaxed, and he clasped his hands on the table. Actually, this is just a warm-up game, as long as the winner is not at peace, it doesn't matter who it is. He has the advantage of the game and we are in danger. Enwuju was silent. I agree. Lu Jingwei broke his fist and suggested, why don't we tie this kid up and keep him from answering the questions, so that he won't get the advantage? The noise in my head became extremely severe. Old Yu hesitated. Is this not a foul? Zhong Yuro raised her eyebrows. The person who committed the foul will either die, just like the guy just now, or be pushed into the punishment stack. You can be careful, few people can be normal come out of that hellish place. But she shrugged, if it can really eliminate a dangerous element directly, I have no problem. These competitors are discussing their own handling methods recklessly. The last sound stopped. After a moment of silence, a sharp and harsh noise made him lower his head. The next second, he heard an unreal electronic analog female voice. The content was incomplete, only intermittent a few words. It's too late, trust me, you will find all your memories. Must survive, come see me alive. You need company, never alone. The sound came to an abrupt end, like a terminated ECG monitor, leaving only the single sound of long sleep. Is this mother's last voice? Where is the memory chip? Enwuju held his head with his hands, gasping for breath, but the voice never appeared again. His severely injured hand had a digital imprint on the back of the hand, like the number 99. His amnesia was indeed artificial. Wu Yu saw that something was wrong with him. What's wrong with you? Leave him alone. Yang Ming sneered. He started acting again. He smiled and rolled up his shirt cuffs. The game is about to start, it's a chance anyway, don't worry about it. Really? Enwuju raised his head. This game is not about luck at all. It is intelligence. Not only does he know this, he believes Yang Ming also knows it. Just listening to the rules, this guessing game looks like who can happen to hit the average range, but it is essentially a war of intelligence and prediction. If the rest of his memory system is not too biased, this game is a beauty game model born out of economics. The process of choosing an average is like betting on the winner of a beauty contest. The most important thing is not whether she is really the most beautiful in her heart, but the most beautiful in most people's hearts. The bet is not the game itself, but the psychology of other contestants. Under Zhong Yuro's flattery attack, Yang Ming did not deny his identity in the financial industry, and has always exaggerated the element of luck. The probability that he knows this theory is at least 80%. Enwuju didn't have much expression on his face, staring at the blank handwriting screen in front of him. The last 30 seconds, the countdown begins. 30. He is very clear about his current situation. If what Yang Ming said before is true, according to his description of the previous game, it seems that he is not the type to fight alone. If this is the case, even if he can win the warm-up match and gain a certain advantage, he will become the target of public criticism in the official game. With such a serious injury, it may not last long. 29. On the basis of the unknown competition system, he cannot guarantee that he will survive as a public target. There is no benefit to being sharp. 28. It can be difficult to eliminate the fears of others. The best way is to deflect the fear. The author has something to say. Stack is a data structure, a linear structure in which data is inserted and deleted at the same end. First push the data in, and then pop it out. 100 photos are published in the newspaper, and the contestants are asked to choose the most beautiful 6. Whoever chooses the result similar to the average preference of all the contestants may win the prize. In this case, each contestant don't choose the 6 that he thinks are the most beautiful, but choose the 6 that others think are the most beautiful. Use your intelligence to speculate on the most beautiful in the minds of ordinary people. No one dies unexpectedly. Enwuju's purpose at this moment is the same as everyone present, to become a survivor in the game. In this warm-up match, he needs to do 2 things. 1. You cannot win. 2. Calmly prompt Yang Ming to win. Losing is actually very simple, choose 1 or 100, you will definitely lose, but it is too dazzling, and it is self-giving at first sight. The difficulty of this game is that the loss is not obvious. It is necessary to make Yang Ming and others believe that they are not as strong as the legend through the results. In this way, other people's fear and defense of him can be alleviated. The thin rain falls on the round table, wrapped in the smell of chemical raw materials and soil, which is terrifyingly real. Time is running out. Play this game with positive thinking. The original purpose is to predict the results of others through analysis, so that the number you choose is closer to the average value of the number selected by everyone. And the other way around? He wants Yang Ming to be the person closest to one half of the mean, so he needs to predict other people's numbers and the numbers Yang Ming may choose, and finally decide which number he wants to write. To achieve the desired result, and Wu Jiao needs to guess the range of numbers for each candidate as possible. The option is between 1 and 100. Assuming that there are enough rational people in the game, enough to ignore personal preferences, the guessed numbers will be evenly between 1 and 100. Distribution: the average value is around 50. After taking one half, the selectable numbers are further reduced, from 1100 to 1,50. If you choose more than 50, it is impossible to become half of the average. According to the probability or median, the number that everyone will generally guess is half the mean of 50, which is 25. Choose numbers above 25, and the odds of winning will be greatly reduced. But this is only the first layer of logic. If everyone is aware of this, and follows this logic, the selected number will generally fall below 25, so that the final one half of the mean will shift down again, becoming into 12.5 or so. And so on. The next layer is 6.25. Players on the first tier will guess one half of their average. The player on the second tier guesses what he thinks is one half of the average in the minds of others. Even one half of what they think, others think. As the player's logic level deepens, the final guess will become smaller and smaller until the number 1, because no player will think that others will choose a smaller number than himself. This equilibrium state is the Nash equilibrium. So the most difficult part of this game is not to guess the average, but to guess which level of thinking mode of the 8 contestants currently on the field. Therefore, after learning the rules of the game, Anwuju devoted all his energy to observation, which was the only way he could obtain information from strangers in a short period of time. A person's thinking mode is largely formed by the day after tomorrow, depending on life experience and education, and the thinking mode will in turn affect his dress and behavior. Lu Jingwei has never been to school, and has not received basic education, so there is a high probability that he will not know game theory. Anwuju glanced at Lu Jingwei and found that he did not write the answer decisively, but scratched his head and thought hard for a while. But when you get this kind of question, you can always think of the number close to the middle. For Lu Jingwei's level, the probability that the mean value is 50 is the greatest. When looking at the others, Anwuju suddenly realized that when he woke up, the panel displayed the 5th level. I don't know if other players are the same, but at least one thing is okay: no people are newbies. Because no one was overly flustered, unfamiliar with the rules, and no one broke down when they saw the offenders being shot. These survivors went through previous rounds and survived, and this round is not a novice round. According to the difficulty of this warm-up game, there are probably similar projects before. The survivors who have survived to this day are not fools. The youngest Wu Yu, Anwuju finds it very strange that such a young child can enter such a life-and-death game. Just by looking at his clothes, he really doesn't seem to be able to afford the cost of education. However, when mentioning the patterns on Anwuju's neck, Wu Yu immediately mentioned the types of flowers. At least it showed that his family was not ordinary. A layer with an average value of 25 can definitely be imagined, but if he really chooses 25, he may also worry that someone will choose a smaller number and lower the average value. His answer is probably closer to 12.5. Wenno and Lao Yu seem to belong to the same kind of people: cautious, afraid of fouls, and overthinking. Wenno wears glasses and has thin calluses on his finger pads after using the keyboard. It is probably a trace of long-term use of the keyboard, so he should be educated, even higher education. They should stand at a higher logical level than Lu Jingwei and Wu Yu, so it is about 6.25, and they can only choose a natural number, so that is 6. And Wuju was lost in thought. It is not easy to think about 6 or so, and there will be risks if you continue to go down, because everyone's thinking depth is different. Even if you can think of deeper logic, you will worry that others will not think of it, so you give up choosing a smaller number. What about Zhong Yuro? She is smart. This is An Wuju's impression of her. She is skilled in interpersonal relationships and good at observation. Before other people understand the key to this game, she has already guessed Yang Ming's occupation. This intelligence-gathering ability is definitely not ordinary people. In addition, the distribution of her finger calluses is not like using a computer, plus the small scars, it is more like using a fine knife. An Wuju looked at the tool bag on her body again, the artificial leather on her calf and the modified palm. It should be related to prosthetic transformation or precision machinery. But precisely because she is smart enough, the analysis of the previous people should be the same as herself. For her, Yang Ming and herself need to be on guard. According to the information about An Wuju given by Yang Ming, the useful information is nothing more than scheming, insidious and cunning. Such an image will lead Zhong Yuro to believe that An Wuju will do something very unexpected options, such as very low numbers. For her, the final result may be around 6. Once someone chooses a very small number, it may be just in her position in the end. Everyone's thoughts can only be speculated at the moment, and Wuju is very clear, he is just guessing, the final result may be neither one. However, there are good guesses and hard guesses. The most difficult thing for him was Shen Ti. This guy is the only one on the field who has no flaws. With a mask on her face, she can't see her appearance, her dress is not unique, and she has not even made a single statement so far. An Wuju raised his head in thinking and looked in the opposite direction. But he found that the other party was looking at him. The two looked at each other again, and Wuju squinted. The other party is also watching him. For everyone on the field, An Wujiao, who is described as a lunatic, is undoubtedly a dangerous time bomb, and I am afraid Shen Ti is also very curious. In the eyes of two people, each other is the biggest uncertainty factor and the fault tolerance point of the other party. It's just that one person has no flaws, and one person is completely exposed. Not true. An Wuju looked down at the paper. No flaw is the biggest flaw. Shen Ti chose not to expose at all, which shows that he understands the fundamentals of the game. Then the choices of the previous few people can also be predicted for him. There are at least 2 people who will choose a number higher than 6, so if Shen Ti wants to win, he will not choose a number that is too low. But which number is between 6 and 12.5, I can only bet. At present, there is a number that may appear around 25, a number that may appear around 12.5, and 3 numbers that may appear around 6, not counting Shen Ti, Yang Ming, and yourself, the average counting down to about 11, then 1/2 of the average will appear on 5 or 6. It stands to reason that if the remaining 3 people are good at deep thinking, the number they will choose should be low, even to the 3rd level. But it is precisely because of this that they understand the rules of how this game works, and what they will really do is not to guess deeper, but to get closer to the answers of others. Shen Ti's full armor made An Wuju feel something, and his intuition made him think that the other party would choose a lower number. Since he can feel it, Yang Ming can also. The final number will not be higher than 6. What will Yang Ming choose? No, how would Yang Ming guess about himself? An Wuju looked at Yang Ming, the other party stared at the display screen, did not raise his head, frowned, seemed to be lost in thought. It's time to calculate. Now the results of the first round of the Golden Mean will be announced. The handwriting screen in front of each of them casts new projections in the air in turn. Wu Yu, 13, Yu Guang, 6, Zhong Yuro, 6, Weno Dachan, 7, Lu Jingui, 25. Yang Ming, 5, Shen Ti, 6, and Wuju, 8. 1/2 of the final average was 4.75, and the closest was Yang Ming's result. Yang Ming won. Seeing the expected smugness and rare relaxation on Yang Ming's face, An Wuju's heart sank. His prediction was right. Yang Ming's level is the same as he imagined, and he can estimate the range of the average on the field, but for him, the estimate is useless, because there is a person he is afraid of. After the previous conversation, An Wuju already knew how dangerous he was in Yang Ming's mind. He was very scheming and good at disguising, he didn't play cards according to common sense, and looked down on anyone else. So playing steadily did not meet his expectations. Bai Qihei was given to him by Yang Ming, and Wuju had no choice but to use it. He calculated Yang Ming's calculation for him, and finally wrote a result on the paper that should meet the other party's expectations. 8. A number that at first glance underestimates the level of others. Although this can't be regarded as an upright tactic, and Wuju has no other way, he just wants to protect himself. Looks like it was intentional. You really deserve to be Brother Yang. Zhong Yuro changed her mouth, brushed the hair hanging from her shoulders, and smiled sweetly, it's amazing. Hey, I thought some people were so powerful. Lu Qingwei sneered, it's no different from people like us, didn't they even lose the warm-up game in the end? This is what An Wujiao expected. When Lu Qingwei said it, he even felt a sense of relief that his goal had been achieved. The dramatic thing is that Yang Ming who speaks for An Wuju is actually a thorn in his side. It's just an occasional stumble. He raised his eyebrows, after all, I haven't done it for nothing. An Wuju sat quietly, staring at his fingers that were still trembling slightly. Because of the victory, a gift box popped up in front of Yang Ming, and it fell to him with blue light. Congratulations! Before declaring your advantage this round, initialize the game for everyone. As soon as the voice fell, all the people on the round table floated up, dizzy, like an illusion caused by ingesting an overdose of hallucinogens. The world wrapped in light pollution and air dust began to spin and collapse, and eventually became a small dot, a white particle. Then, like an explosion, the particles expand into a whole new world at an uncapable speed. Sacred Voice began to introduce the world view of the new round of the game. This round of the game is called the Red and Black Carnage. The terrorists carried out a poison gas attack on Miami. The density of this poison gas is lower than the air, and the death and injury above the surface are it's so bad. At the moment of life and death, the 8 of you came to the safe bunker under the office building by accident through the air defense passage. Here is a miniature nuclear bunker secretly excavated and developed by the founder of Kamiki Corporation. It is 18 meters deep underground. It is safe but closed, and the exit is destroyed. It can only be blasted from the outside. The survival resources here are very limited, only enough for the 8 of you to support 4 nights and 5 days. The dust-like particles gradually gather into fragments, and the fragments approach and join together. In the bunker, a yellow energy bar will be displayed on the top of each of you. It is full at the time of initialization, but with the lack of materials, hunger, thirst, and other problems, the energy value will continue to decrease, and it will be regarded as a death and out after returning to zero. The current system time is 9 am. At 9 am on the 5th day, a rescue team will rescue everyone, of course, everyone who is alive. As long as it reaches 9 points, it means that the survival is successful. Does the rescue team need to dig for 5 days with just a few people? It was Zhong Yuro's voice, rescue, or archaeology. The eyes are too dazzling, and Wuju's damaged vision makes it difficult for him to adapt, and it takes nearly 10 seconds for his vision to become clear. He heard Weno's voice. On the 5th day to save us, is the material enough? A moment later, the modeled world finally appeared before their eyes. And Wuju stared at the closed door in front of him, and the Passion of Jesus drawn on it. It can't be that simple. The author has something to say. The painting of the painter Raphael, depicting the scene of being crucified on the cross. Volume 2 Red and Black Carnage. Initialization completed, variables created successfully, number before running, 8. This statement made An Wujiao uncomfortable. They are obviously real people, but they are described by cold words like program variables. The number of survivors is not necessarily 8 after the game starts. Shenjian continued, 8 variables are assigned 8 identities. There are capitalists who hold huge wealth, and there are wanderers who have nothing. Also different. For example, the capitalist survives with the highest convertible value but the lowest power value. In addition to this, each of you will receive completely different abilities that may play an unexpected role in this battle for survival. Also, taking the capitalist as an example, this role will have the ability to occupy half of the resources of the entire safe bunker. Hearing this sentence, An Wuju immediately realized something. Yang Ming grinned proudly beside him. Can I use the reward for the announced warm-up match now? There is no turbulence in the holy voice, but every word of the announcement dominates the fate of these people. Of course. The warm-up match winner Yang Ming should watch each character panel first and choose the character and game format he wants. Everyone other than him will be randomly assigned by the system. This. Lu Qingwei shouted with dissatisfaction, but he probably reacted to the fact that no matter how he protested, Yang Ming's great advantage was already a done deal, and offending him instead it was not good for me, so I swallowed the rest of the swear words back into my stomach, and my face was very ugly. The expressions of the rest of the people were not much better, but there was nothing they could do. Yang Ming squeezed from the edge of several people to the middle, adjusted his tie, and told the system that he was ready. Okay, showing you the character panel. Yang Ming stood upright, the gift box appeared again, opened in front of him, he stretched out a forefinger and slid in the void. These character panels were invisible to others, so he looked like this. It looks so funny. Soon, Yang Ming made a decision and chose the role of a capitalist. No one was surprised when the system announced. When he turned around, An Wuju saw a trace of disdain for himself on his face. How about Brother Yang, isn't he very good? Even Lu Qingwei, who thought he was strong at first, now faces Yang Ming with a diligent smile, and the flesh on his face is crowded into a ball. Can also inject some pleasant light into the blind and shrinking eyeball. What are the other characters? Yang Ming snapped his thin fingers like Lu Qingwei did before, with the smile of a successful person on his face. You can see it when the system randomly assigns it. Zhong Yuro approached Yang Ming with a smile, raised her hand and gently touched Yang Ming's shoulder. Oh, Brother Yang, I've been keeping secrets for so long. Not only these two people, An Wuju could feel that almost everyone in this narrow space was staring at Yang Ming, like a light-seeking insect. Even the timid Winnow was much closer to Yang Ming, even if you can't get in. His eyes fell on the guy named Shen Ti inadvertently. What a freak! Then, Lao Yu hesitated for a long time and couldn't help but said, Yang Ming, the next competition system. In the small space, Yang Ming was surrounded by everyone. The brief silence was like a dull knife, slowly cutting a nerve. An Wuju knew that as long as Yang Ming said a word, no matter what role these people held, they would go forward for him and stand unswervingly in his team. Yang Ming smiled, the radiance in the cloudy eyes made them look like a pair of expensive prosthetic eyes. I choose individual battles. The group is undoubtedly doing charity. The choice of personal battle swept many people's enthusiasm, which can be seen from the expression. But for An Wuju, this result is not necessarily a bad thing. Role assignment and information loading for you now. In an instant, several blue lasers appeared in the air, and in the dark green fluorescent fonts that were suspended and rolled continuously appeared, which were codes. Publish all variable assignment results. Yang Ming capitalist Wu Yu employee and Wuju intern of the Cyber Security Department Zhong Yuro chairman's daughter Wenno researcher older than homeless Lu Qingwei robber Shen Ti security robot. Immediately afterwards, a virtual character panel appeared in front of each of them, and Wuju stared at the line of information printed out by the blue laser in front of him. Role, intern in Cyber Security Department. Life value, 4 number of health bars, 3 ability, select a player to invade its panel, and swap its red and black lines with the opponent's red and black lines. This skill only has one chance. Everyone has obtained their character information, and then the real rules of the game. After finishing speaking, the thick and sturdy steel door in front of them slowly moved away from left to right, revealing a dark corridor with no light, like a bottomless well, inside which was drained desire. The bunker survival battle consists of 5 days and 4 nights. During the day, each player distributes the survival materials by themselves. If there is a disagreement during the distribution process, the players can duel, and cannot refuse anyone's duel. The initiator can verbally initiate or enter the duel threshold and press the initiation button. Remember, the number of duels in every 24 hours is fixed, and the duel threshold will enter a dormant period after the number of duels is exceeded. The duel is not oneo none, other players can choose to join the faction or sit on the sidelines. The health bar of all players in the camp will be superimposed on the player who originally initiated or accepted the duel. 2 players will duel, and the one with the higher blood bar wins and gets the supplies, while the other team will receive supplies every time people lose a blood bar. After 11 o'clock in the evening, all players will be forced to return to their exclusive rooms to rest. Your rooms will be sorted from 1 to 8, from 12 o'clock in the evening to 6 in the morning. The hypnotic gas is released, and you will be forced to fall asleep. Players with depleted health bars will die, as in previous games. When you die in the altar, you will also be brain dead in reality. After 9 o'clock on the 5th day, the final survival value will be carried out for everyone. Speaking of this, Wu Yu, who has been very silent, said with a little doubt, "Settlement." And Wu Ju also finds it strange. The survival value in each character panel is a fixed constant, and the duel during the game will not lose the survival value, so why settle when it ends? That's right. Here we will announce the hidden parameters on the character panel, black line and red line, authorized to adapt from the board game Survival. The black line is connected to the person you curse, the red line connects the person you have a crush on. This parameter is randomly assigned by the system. There will be no situation where you curse yourself or have a crush on yourself, and each person may be connected by other people's red or black lines. No one except yourself can see your red and black lines unless you actively disclose it. Survival value. This is what red and black mean. Finally, the top 4 players in cumulative survival value will advance to the next round. The dark passage suddenly lights up, and the road ahead is illuminated. The pilgrimage journey begins again. I wish you a pleasant journey. Thing. When walking down the aisle, Anwuju paid attention to the wall. The center of the fresco on the right is Jesus, the that humans believed in the early years, but now Christianity has become a minority religion. Sitting on either side of were the other 12 disciples, with different expressions. The Last Supper. Zhong Yuro on the side opened her mouth and said what Anwuju thought. Then she smiled again. I have a fake, it took a minute to 3D print it, it is very noble and elegant. Anwuju nodded. He glanced a little and saw that the guy in the mask was bending over, holding a magnifying glass that he got from nowhere, and looking at the mural in front of his face. It looked a bit funny. Zhong Yuro put her hands on her hips and turned to look at the mural on the left. At the center of the picture is the Virgin Mary holding the Holy Child, surrounded by pilgrims. She is not very familiar with it, this is beyond her knowledge of classical oil painting, but Anwu Yao, who has always been silent, said his name first. This is the Pilgrimage of the Three Magi, also by Leonardo da Vinci. Shen Ti also turned his head and held the magnifying glass in his hand. The mechanical guanyin on his face had a subtle feeling with this dull movement, but Anwu couldn't describe it. How do you know? Zhong Yuro folded her arms and raised her eyebrows. Don't you mean amnesia? My memory is missing a part of my memory, but it seems not to affect my cognition. The words are a bit long, and Anwu can only speak slowly, a little laborious, and seems more sincere. You mean you just forgot the memory of yourself coming to the altar? Anwu was not sure, shook his head and wanted to continue, but heard Lu Jingui, who was walking in front with Yang Ming and the others, roar, what are you doing sneaking in the back? Still not coming? Under such game rules, they had to temporarily obey Yang Ming. The group walked through the long passage, and the darkness was unfamiliar. The world they live in is full of light, the neon that never goes out all night, the spotlights that linger in the streets like ghosts, and the most damp and dirty corners are piled up with light pollution. Humans are naturally afraid of unfamiliar things. Everyone groping to the end of the passage in abnormal silence. There is only one smooth black door, under the light of the wall chandelier, like a mirror, a sea of floating oil. How do you open this? Lu Jingwei coaxed from behind. Wu Yu held the Rubik's Cube in his hand and muttered in a low voice, just open your mouth and ask. Lu Jingwei, who came up with energy, stretched out his hand and pushed Wu Yu's shoulder hard from behind. Do you want to die? Being pushed by him like this, the Rubik's Cube in Wu Yu's hand fell to the ground, rolled for half a week, and rolled into the black door. From the corners to the complete cube, it was completely engulfed, and the place where it touched blue fluorescent data lines appeared, spread from the broken wall and gradually disappeared. Let's go, why are you standing still? Zhong Yuro stepped on her high heels and walked in towards the black door, the others followed, and Wuju walked at the end. The scene inside the door is completely different from the deep corridor outside the door. The entire front hall is wide and bright, with a delicate vault on the head, and the edges are carved with various angels and saints that symbolize theocratic power. Sleeping in light and shadow, the dome in the middle is a whole ornate fresco, imprinting the brilliance of religion on the top of the head. Granite columns and gilt, arch-shaped structure, confession room-like room. Everything here is less like a so-called miniature nuclear bunker, more like a Baroque underground church. Every inch of the floor was covered with a dark red long-haired carpet, and even the sofas were placed in rows, like rows of chairs for worship. The strong sense of religion makes An Wujiao feel uncomfortable for no reason. Everyone! Yang Ming's voice broke the silence of the bunker. Let's get to know each other's character panel first, how about it? What he said seemed to be negotiating, but there was no such meaning in his tone. Now that he has the most advantageous role, he has naturally become the dominant player in the game, and no one else dares to oppose him. The character panel was called and displayed at the same time, and everyone's eyes were on other people's panels, especially the ability column. An Wuju was no exception, he recorded other people's information with the fastest speed. In addition to the ability to control half of the survival resources, Yang Ming, who got capitalist, also has a very exaggerated special function for the red and black lines. You can learn about company employees, Wu Yo, red and black lines. The role of the capitalist is exactly the same as in reality. To work for him is to sell his personal dignity. Zhong Yuro joked that she got the rich family daughter ID card, but the chairman's daughter studied medicine, so her ability is to restore the blood of others or herself, but there are only 2 chances, 1 health bar each time. If the 2 chances are all used on oneself, 10,000 points will be reduced at the time of settlement. She turned her head and saw that Weno got the role of a scientific researcher in the company, with a rather envious expression. I like people who engage in scientific research the most. Weno was stunned for a moment, his cheeks flushed, and he quickly lowered his head. The abilities he acquired also correspond to the characters. After 3 days of research and development side quests, he can double his survival resources. These skills are very important in this survival game, either related to resources or health bars. In contrast, the employee card Wu Yu got, it seems very weak. His ability is only an opportunity to stay up every other night. An Wuju looked at Lu Jingwei on the other side. He was poking at the holographic panel projected in front of him. No resistance, but only in person. And what Lao Yu got is the Wanderer. The ability matches the name, and can move freely to other people's rooms during the night time from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. The last thing An Wuju noticed was Shen Ti sitting cross-legged on the carpet. The other party stared at the character panel. The mechanical mask made it impossible to see his expression. His role is not very good, it is the artificial intelligence in the company building, and to put it bluntly, it is a security robot. The survival value is the lowest of all, only 1 point. This setting completely highlights the arrogance of human beings as creators. Shen Ti suddenly raised his arms and stretched his waist greatly. His skills are also somewhat passive when others attack him, he can copy the opponent's skills, but there is only one precious opportunity. Why? Lu Qingwei violently broke the silence. Why is my survival value only 2 points? Because your character is a robber. Zhong Yuro smiled, but this is also fair. You look at the parameters of these characters, the rules are very obvious. Wu Yu lowered his head to play the Rubik's Cube, and whispered, the higher the survival score, the lower the blood bar, and the lower the force value. Yes, it's actually balanced. Lao Yu nodded, my survival value is only 3, but I have 6 health bars. Zhong Yuro nodded and reported to her family, my role is a rich lady, and in reverse with you, my survival value is 7 points, but my health bar is only 1. Fortunately, I can breastfeed myself. Otherwise it would be too crispy. Yang Ming is stronger than me, his survival value is higher than me, he has 8 points, and the health bar still has 2 points. After she finished speaking, her arm rested on Wu Yu, who was playing the Rubik's Cube with her head down. On his shoulders, children have become social animals before they reach adulthood, with 4 blood bars and 5 survival value, not bad. Wu Yu's hand playing the Rubik's Cube paused for a second, and then continued to turn without expression. Zhong Yuro's beautiful eyes swept over, staring at Wenno, who had never dared to speak. She jumped in front of him, tilted her head, your parameters look so beautiful. The survival value is 6, and the health bar also has 5. It's really unbalanced. She smiled, you can also copy resources. Wenno stuttered and explained, but if the side quest fails, the skill will also fail. Zhong Yuro shrugged, it shouldn't fail like this, don't be nervous. Your overall strength is so strong, maybe it will depend on you. Hearing these words, Yang Ming, who was beside him, couldn't sit still, his eyes flicked on Wenno's face a few times, and finally fell on Anwuju. Anwuju became accustomed to this man's mocking and slightly frightened eyes, but he didn't understand where the point of his fear was. He can't possibly have the upper hand, there's really nothing to be afraid of. But even if he wins the warm-up game and picks the best character, he will definitely be dueled to death at the beginning of the game. No one will choose his side. In terms of force value, I am the highest. After listening for a round, Lu Qingwei began to accept the fact that his survival value was low, but his high force value also made him proud. He rolled up his sleeves to reveal his strong arms, I have 7 health bars. No. Zhong Yuro sat on the sofa with a playful tone, pointing her index finger to the mechanical Guanyin who was sitting cross-legged on the carpet with her back to the crowd. He tilted his head as if meditating. Shen Ti is not a human, he is full of blood, there are 8 in total. Anwuju looked in his direction. The guy turned his back to everyone and stretched out his right hand, comparing a pair of scissors. The author has something to say, this game is a change and expansion of a board game survival, similar to Werewolf, mainly for survival duels and the setting of love cards and dislike cards. The werewolf killing game appeared in the novel, there are a lot of them, so they can be written by default, but survival is relatively niche, so I specifically found the producer, email protected Xianjia, has asked for the authorization of the adaptation and expansion, and the Weibo has the 8 producer and the authorization record. If you are interested, you can play it, but most of the text is different from the game. Because it is in line with the style of this article, the background of the story has been greatly changed, and the characters and corresponding abilities that are more in line with the worldview have been recreated. In particular, because of the previous trademark squatting problem, the Chinese trademark of survival was pirated and registered, that is, survival of fury. In fact, survival of survival is the genuine product. Where does it come from? But there will still be people who will buckle their hats. In fact, there are really many works that apply the beauty pageant game, whether it is film and television or comic animation, as well as others such as the Musketeer game, the Smart Pig game and the Prisoner's Dilemma. The application is really very much. I never said that this is a knowledge point that I invented and created. I definitely don't deserve it. I just hope that everyone can read the label a little to avoid misunderstanding. Happy Kixie Festival, more and more, I hope everyone is happy. For everyone's convenience, I list the characters: 1 The capitalist of the Monopoly Enterprise, Yang Ming, survival value, 8, force value, 2, ability, 1/2 resources, knowing employees, Wu Yu, red and black lines, 2 rich family daughter, Zhou Yuro, survival value 7, force value 1, ability, there are 2 opportunities to increase the blood of others or yourself, each time 1 point, 2 times on yourself will deduct 1 Halloween coins, 3 researcher, Dachin Winnow, survival value 6, force value 5, ability, after completing your own branch line, you can double your own survival resources, 4 company employee, Wu Yu, survival value 5, force value 4, ability, you can stay up every other night, 6 security AI, Shen Ti, survival value 1, force value 8, ability, when others take the initiative to attack, you can copy the other party's skills, only 1 chance, 7 homeless, old Yu, survival value 3, force value 6, ability, free to move to other people's rooms at night from 7 p.m. to 5:00 am. The next day, 8 terrorist robbers taking advantage of the chaos, Lu Jingwei, survival value 2, force value 7, ability, there are 2 opportunities to plunder other people's food in person and not be resisted, the rules look complicated. In fact, as you can see later, they are not that complicated, but need to be introduced more. Everything is complete except for no electronics. In the dark red patterns on the beige wallpaper are like dried blood stains, waiting for sacrifice and death in the dusty room for many years. And Wuju stared at the desk fascinatedly. On the wall behind the red solid wood desk hung an ancient wooden clock, the upper end was a quartz clock covered by a glass sheet, and the lower end was a side door, the wooden box, but at this time, the 2 small doors were still tightly closed. It is 9:31 am. Found, water and food. The storage cabinets store the survival resources they need, but half of them are already labeled capitalist. Wenno Dachin reaches out and tries to get it, but can't pick it up anyway. Until Yang Wenming came, these labeled things were taken out. The so-called survival resources are only the simplest bread, bottled water, anti-inflammatory drugs, painkillers, and gauze bandages, and nothing else. The weight of the things does not seem to be much, and most of them belong to the capitalist Yang Ming. The food that really belongs to other people is only 7 adult men's palm-sized bread and 7 bottles of water. Old Yu sighed, actually, a piece of bread can last for 5 days in reality, but the altar must have adjusted the parameters. Lu Jingwei picked up 2 breads and 2 bottles of water and wanted to leave, but was stopped by Zhou Yuro. Why start robbing things so soon? First come, first served. Lu Jingwei quibble. Wu Yu sighed, why don't you say that it is ranked by survival value? Lu Jingwei was immediately annoyed, I'm worthless in life, but your life is worthwhile? Come on, come and me, and whoever wins when you see it. Wenno immediately grabbed Wu Yu, brother, don't say such things. What did I say? Wu Yu frowned and broke away from Dachin Wenno's hand, you are with them, don't think I didn't hear you talking together just now. Don't quarrel. Lao Yu also began to smooth things out, this is just the beginning, everyone save your energy and be peaceful. The more he said that, the more arguing the others became. And Wuju took a breath, and found that Shen Ti, who was sitting on the carpet in the distance, suddenly moved to them and sat upright. As soon as there was a quarrel, Shen Ti applauded lightly, seeing An Wuju stunned. Where can you rank, pretend to be garlic here? You are still crying and calling your mother when Lao Tzu is crawling and rolling in the Easter competition. As soon as he finished speaking, it was as if he had flipped a switch of some sort. Wu Yu slammed up and punched Lu Jingui. If it wasn't for Zhou Yuro's quick reaction, they would have fought hard no deal. And Wu Ju didn't move, sat on the spot. When he heard Lu Jingui's words, he suddenly thought of something. Resurrection. That is to say, the last four who can live to the last that Chen Jian did not mention may not necessarily die directly. As long as you don't die during the game, you still have a chance to enter the Easter. I have a suggestion. And Wu Ju hurriedly opened his mouth, fearing that others might not hear him. He deliberately made a louder voice. Everyone calmed down and turned around, looking at An Wugui who was speaking. He held the upper part of the injured wrist, his face remained the same, but the speed of his speech was still very slow and sluggish, unlike the others. The half that belongs to the capitalist role, let Yang Ming dispose of it, and the remaining half is distributed equally to everyone, so that at least everyone will not starve to death before the game is over. This proposal is not unexpected, and even wandered silently in everyone's mind. But everyone is doubting whether this rule will be fulfilled as promised. Old Yu continued, "What do you mean, will be divided evenly, no duel? But in the end, it will still be settled, and there will always be losers." Sit back on the sofa without blame, and said slowly, "Yes." But when the rules were just announced, it was clearly stated that those who died during the game would also be brain dead in reality. Right. He looked at everyone, his dark pupils reflected the warm yellow lights in the bunker, and he spoke with difficulty, but every word was sincere. But Chen Jian did not explicitly say that the final settlement will be made. What will happen to the bottom four? Maybe they will enter the resurrection game, not necessarily. But, Wu Yu was punched, his cheekbones were red, and his eyes were stubborn. A piece of bread won't last. I think so, but at least it can last for a few days. And Wu Ju said, this game is not a zero-sum game, there is no inevitability of my life and death, and it is a victory to survive for a day. One day, there will be the possibility of discussing other survival strategies. As long as we cooperate, maybe we can try to go out completely. After hearing this, the others fell silent. I think it's quite right. Zhou Yuro smiled, it's not worth dying here, and there's no chance of resurrection. When everyone started to think about the peaceful division of blameless, Yang Ming stood up, and he walked slowly towards An Wujiao. Your acting is really good. Every time you can pretend to be good for everyone, gain trust by helping others, and then incite and persuade everyone. An Wuju looked up at him without speaking. The two faced each other for a while, and finally Yang Ming turned around, called up his panel, and clicked his finger on it. I accept Tai. He smiled open-mindedly, also, I have to give a herd of my resources to everyone. He cancelled the labels of these survival resources, and they became available for acquisition. Public resources used. The first to question was Wu Yu, who was always silent. Would you be so kind? Yes. Zhou Yuro laughed, a herd of the half, and 1/6 of the complete resources, more than enough for one person. If this is the case, like just now, no blame, we might really be able to hold on to the end without any difference. But this actually means that if Yang Ming doesn't give it, the rest of them won't get to the end. And Wu Ju knew very well that in any case, Yang Ming's supplies were their life-saving straw. He just hopes that everyone can maintain a united attitude, so that it is possible to persuade or defeat Yang Ming. After all, the materials here are clearly enough for everyone to survive. If someone dies because of lack of supplies, it is a real death in vain. I said I will give it, but I have one condition. These things can only be shared equally by the 6 of you. Yang Ming's mouth twitched, and Wu Ju can't take it at all. This is a choice without hesitation. As long as they agree, they can get more resources in a more stable situation than the previous even distribution method. Yang Ming did not use power to force everyone to obey him, but took the initiative to cede a part of his own resources as a chip to raise in this isolated game. Except for peace, everyone is sure to win. I agree. Who wouldn't agree with such a good deal? Lu Jingwei was still the first to express his stance. I agree with what Mr. Yang said. Dachan Wenno also raised his hand weakly, but there was a smile that couldn't be hidden on his face. They completely forgot the peaceful strategy and compassion of Anwugui, and were only excited to get the extra gift. Yang Ming retrieved these materials back to the panel, unexpectedly showing full patience to Lu Jingwei's recklessness. Wait. He looked at the others. I will divide these materials into 2 parts. Time to each of you. Don't worry, I will give it when I say it. After he finished speaking, he squatted down and grabbed the bread on the ground. Even if each of you doesn't have a duel, you won't be able to eat at the end, and there will be less water. I will give you the life-saving rations. I repeat, no one can help and would you, understand? Lu Jingwei immediately smiled flatteringly. I know, I'll divide these unlabeled ones first. After that, he started dividing up on his own. Regarding Yang Ming's coercion and inducement, others did not directly agree with him, and no one stood up to oppose it. Even Lao Yu, who would refute Yang Ming's words at the beginning, faced the real survival battle and his own disadvantages, and had to choose silence. Anwuju was sitting on the sofa 3 or 4 meters away from them, quietly watching the other people carve up their lives. But he didn't feel any regrets. Given another chance, Anwuju would also make suggestions to make everyone work hard to survive. I feel that someone is staring at me, and I look forward to my intuition. It's the mechanical Guanyin again. He leaned against the wall, his head was tilted, his eyes never left Anwujiao, as if he was a test subject to be observed, like a ghost, making no sound but following him. Lu Jingwei and Wenno handed the distributed supplies to the remaining few. Wu Yu and Zhou Niro both glanced at Anwuju when they met, but they were soon discovered by Yang Ming. I put forward such a small condition, I hope everyone can follow it and don't go against my good intentions. Yang Ming walked over to Anwuju, bent down and smiled at him. Want food? Duel. Anwuju didn't have much expression, her eyes were clear. Are you afraid of me? He even seemed to be extremely simple when he asked questions, his speech rate was still slow, and his sentences were strange and unsmooth, but Yang Ming seemed to be stabbed in something, and grabbed his clothes. He led, Anwuju, I warn you, don't look at me like that. Don't think you can still control everyone like before, I can let you die if I want you to die now. Anwuju still didn't change his expression, he just closed his eyes as approval. This appearance made Yang Ming more and more angry, and he was about to get angry when he heard a boom sound behind him, and a small and hard object hit the back of his head from behind. Who? Yang Ming let go and turned around suddenly. Anwuju straightened his collar, looked up and saw Shen Ti not far away holding the champagne he got from somewhere. The wine without the cork kept pouring out and dripping onto the floor. Ah! He let out a slightly surprised and bewildered voice, and covered his mouth under the mask with his black gloved hand. But in the next second, he covered his mouth and bent over to laugh, laughing non-stop. His nervous appearance made Yang Ming speechless. Laughing, the mask on Shen Ti's face clicked, he raised his hand and took off the lower part, took a sip of the champagne he just opened, and looked like he was enjoying it. But the enjoyment didn't last long. Shen Ti was choked and coughed, his lips were tight, and he could see disgust. Anwuju sat on the spot and suddenly laughed, like a child. Neuropathy. Although Yang Ming hates Anwuju, but Shen Ti is present, he doesn't know the opponent's strength, nor can he guess his camp, and he is currently the most on the field people. Once angered, they are asking for trouble. So Yang Ming just tugged on his wetsuit jacket and walked away with a bad look on his face. Not long after, Shen Ti also left, humming an unknown tune. In the end, as Yang Ming expected, Anwuju did not get water and food. He walked to the front of the storage cabinet where the supplies were stored and squatted down, only to find a little gauze and bandages that were left. He squatted at the door of the locker, barely wrapping his wrists with these leftovers. Seeing this shocking injury, Enwuju felt a little puzzled about his abnormal pain tolerance. Although it wasn't that painful, he snapped off the bandage and held his right arm over his chest. It is no exaggeration to say that it is the worst for him now. Among the 8 people, he is the only one who has no water and food. It is absolutely impossible to last until the end of the game. If he really wants to duel, his only 3 health bars are also pitiful. His force value is only 1 point, Zhong Yuro and Yang Ming, who is 2 points. Based on the degree of Yang Ming's jealousy of himself, I am afraid that if he fights with him personally, he will step in. The purpose is to make him die. Time passed little by little, resting on the sofa without blame, staring at the patterns on the ceiling in silence. The dark enclosed space nourishes something, breaking out of the ground, ready to move. After the materials were distributed, the people in the room lost their motivation to communicate. They scattered in every corner of the bunker, guarding the materials they just got. Probably because of the red line and the black line, it is difficult for these people trapped in the limited underground space to communicate with each other sincerely, and trust has become a scarce thing. No one knew whether the person standing in front of Yan Yan was cursing him behind his back, wishing he would die immediately. It was almost 10:30 when Wenno and Lu Jingui came back and walked to Enwuju. I don't know what their purpose was, but Enwuju still sat up straight, raised his eyes and looked at them. Wenno's expression was a little worried. He broke off most of the bread in his hand and handed it to Enwuju. Enwuju looked at him calmly, not taking it immediately. I didn't even think about joining Yang Ming's team just now, promising not to save myself a way to survive, and now I'm here to help. I think you're right just now. This is not a zero-sum game. Seeing him not accepting, Wenno's expression was a little cramped. He licked his lips and put his hand in the bread. Is closer, you take it, although it is not much, but it can last a day or 2. Enwuju looked down at the bread with the label Wenno Taisei in his hand, looked up at him again, and said nothing. Lu Jingui became impatient and shouted at him, if you want to hold it, just hold it, it's such a mess. Then he snatched the bread from Wenno's hand and threw it into Enwugui's arms inside. The author has something to say. Shen Ti, oops, why did I just hit it? Let's apologize with a T like ah in the tea. Today, I was also attracted by a future wife who can't be surprised. The bread fell and landed on Enwuju's lap. He glanced down, then looked up at them. Wenno didn't comment on Lu Jinggui's actions just now. He even made a smile and urged, you can take a bite. But Enwuju had no appetite at the moment. He gave Wenno a smile, no, thank you. Wenno did not respond, just glanced at Lu Jingui. Lu Jingui clicked his tongue irritably, picked up the bread on Enwuju's lap, and suddenly grabbed Enwuju's chin with his other hand. What are you doing? Lu Jingui kicked Enwuju's lower abdomen, pressed his legs with his legs, and fixed him on the sofa with this violent method. Unable to run, he turned back and shouted to Wenno, hand on hand. Enwuju guessed that they were not just here to give him food, but Lu Jingui pressed him so tightly, the knee of the other leg directly pressed his severely injured wrist, Enwuju couldn't resist at all. He struggled, seeing that Wenno was forcibly stuffing the dry and hard bread into his mouth. He shook his head in resistance, and Lu Jingui pinched it even tighter, almost smashing his face. Cough! Cough! The bread almost choked into the air pipe, and Enwuju had no choice but to swallow it, coughing continuously. It should work. Wenno asked Lu Jingui, as long as you eat it, the mission is successful. Tasks. Sure enough, to complete his mission. Enwuju blushed as he lowered his head and coughed. The stuffed food, along with the humiliation, suffocated him. Lu Jingui laughed, that means, I can grab it too? I'll try. You only get 2 chances. Wenno was afraid that he would suffer and tried to stop it. Lu Jingui didn't care at all. On the one hand, he desperately wants to deflate and humiliate this so-called strong guy so that he can get great satisfaction. On the other hand, he believed in his abilities and knew that he would not be reduced to the point of being without supplies. "I'll grab it." He took away the half-loaf of bread that Winnow kindly donated, but Anwuju didn't eat it completely, and the floating label on the bread suddenly changed to the word Lu Chingui. Lu Chingui laughed, "Really?" Winnow stood on tiptoe and glanced, "Ah, it's yours so soon. What are you afraid of? Haven't you already completed the task of sharing food? It's still tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. By then, your supplies will double and you will be much stronger than me." "Same." They left just like that, laughing and talking. Before leaving, Lu Chingui kicked Anwu to blame, because the bread he spit out stained his shoes. Leaning on the sofa, Anwuju, who was depressed, suddenly had a thought, a strategy that could save himself, but was rather vicious. But he gave up quickly, like a cigarette butt. He even had some self-doubt, weird that he could come up with such a method. Sit quietly for a while, and when Anwuju stood up, it was already past 11 o'clock. Thirst made him move instinctively, and went to where Shen Ti was standing before, but now the other party has disappeared. Finally, Anwuju stopped in front of the low cabinet. In just a moment, he picked up the bottle of champagne abandoned by Shen Ti and took a sip from the mouth of the bottle. "The taste is not bad." He raised his hand and wiped the corner of his mouth, picked up the wine bottle and walked to the other door of the living room, which led to another long and winding corridor. There is a circular device installed every meter above, and Wuju can't see clearly. Whenever he passed one, the thing suddenly lit up, a lamp in the shape of a juvenile angel, but with only the head of an angel. One after another, they glowed behind Anwuju, and then went out. He walked in slowly, only to realize that this was not a straight corridor, but a corner. There is a voice of dialogue, but it is so low that Anwuju can't hear the content. He immediately stepped back before stepping over the lamp, standing in the darkness. His footsteps were soft and barely audible, so the other party didn't notice him. With the memory of the voice, Yang Ming and Winnow can be vaguely identified. Although he couldn't hear the content clearly, Anwuju also noticed something strange. Unlike Yang Ming's previous state of wanting to control everything, in this conversation, the timid Winnow obviously said more, and Yang Ming just responded and didn't say anything. If you want to hear clearly, you must get close, but Anwuju doesn't want to take risks. Soon, the dialogue fades and eventually disappears. He heard the footsteps of two people and dispersed. Stand silently in the corridor for a while, Anwuju also walked inside. The structure inside is more complicated. At the end of the corridor is a small square-structured porch with 4 or 5 doors, one of which is a Baroque circular arch with a beautiful statue of angels carved on it. There is a floating projection of the word lounge above the arch. Originally, the white arches should convey a delicate and sacred sense of art, but it was probably still in the morning. The lights were not turned on here, and the shadowy green projection became the only light source for the dark porch. Even the holy angel relief on the arch became very strange. Anwuju turned his head. The projections on the other doors were the Qin room, reading room, reference room and conference room. Behind the door was a long and deep detour corridor. The structure of this bunker is perfect for a secret meeting. Behind the door of the lounge is a new porch. As soon as Anwuju pushed the door in, he saw Zhong Yuro's back. The porch is spacious and slightly brighter than the previous porch, with 8 different carved arches marked with numbers 1 to 8 and names. 1 Yang Ming, 2 Zhong Yuro, 3 Winnow Dachan, 4 Wu Yu, 5 Anwuju, 6 Lao, 7 Shen Ti, 8 Lu Chingui. It's not entirely based on survival value, right? Zhong Yuro said directly without turning her head. Anwuju didn't pretend, he hummed softly. She turned her head and smiled at Anwuju, "You walk silently. Then how did you find out?" Anwuju asked. Zhong Yuro raised her eyebrows, "Girl's intuition." After speaking, Her eyes showed some deliberate apology. What should I do? You are completely targeted now. And Wuju didn't say anything, he was judging what attitude this woman is now. I said it directly. Zhong Yuro raised her hands, I can't help you right now. She called out her own parameters, and immediately a fluorescent green blood bar appeared on the top of her head. My force value is the lowest, even if I use 2 opportunities to breastfeed myself, there are only 3 blood, if I really duel, I can't protect myself. Hearing her so direct, and Wugui was much more relaxed. He thought of something and asked in a very slow voice, what happens when you die? Didn't the holy voice say it? Brain dead. She tapped her temples, didn't we all enter the game cabin in reality? It's like a capsule, if it's real we died, and after 24 hours it was confirmed that there was no suspended animation, the device in the capsule automatically ejected us into the processing plant and recycled it into fertilizer. After she finished speaking, she showed a disgusted expression, this method of dying is not elegant at all. How do you know? And Wuju asked. Zhong Yuro paused for a while, and the face that was always full of energy and amorous feelings rarely appeared gloomy. I saw it with my own eyes. But she just went one step ahead. Hearing this, An Wuju was a little moved, he already started thinking of words of comfort in his mind, but his mouth couldn't keep up. Zhong Yuro took the lead. So, she didn't hide it, in order to survive, I may stand in line to Yang Ming's side. An Wuju nodded without speaking. His well-behaved and sensible appearance made Zhong Yuro even more suspicious of Yang Ming's words. She kindly offered a strategy, if you're like this, it's better to have a good relationship with Winnow or Lu Jingui. One of them can copy the supplies, the other can grab it, and maybe they will give you some. An Wuju didn't speak, and he didn't plan to tell Zhong Yuro what just happened. However, Zhong Yuro was too smart and kept staring at her flushed cheeks. This feeling of being scrutinized is not very comfortable, and Wuju tries to walk away. He noticed a thick-looking book fastened to the wall next to door 8, and walked towards it. You don't really plan to let everyone live safely. Zhong Yuro followed him and set foot in front of the book. Do you think I lie? And Wuju stretched out his hand to the book. This book seems to be a long time ago, this page cannot be opened, as if it has been frozen for a long time, covered with a thick layer of dust. Yang Ming said it too much, but when you said those words, my heart was still a little touched. He's been a good person, even if it's a fake good person who pretends to be like him. And Wuju smiled and said nothing. Idealists are short-lived here. Seeing him open the book, Zhong Yuro also leaned in, blew off the dust on it, and read the contents of the 2 pages aloud. There was a lot of blank space and few words. It seemed that everything was written as requirements. 1. Players need to enter the personal restroom at night, and after midnight, release hypnotic gas in the whole range to force sleep, except for employees who use the ability to stay up late. After falling asleep, players will not wake up until at 6 o'clock in the morning, the effect of the drug has completely dissipated, and the player will gradually wake up. 2. Before 12 o'clock on the first night, you can enter the room next to your lounge, either left or right, other rooms are not allowed, and number 1 and number 8 are also considered next door. Entering other rooms by forced means is considered a foul, except for the use of skills by the wanderer, and half of the energy value will be deducted. 3. If you have stayed in another room on the first night, you need to follow the path of the first night to enter the next room on the second night. And so on. 4. You can stay in other people's rooms without fouling. After reading, Zhong Yuro pondered for a while. What a strange rule, like a game of chess. She turned to look at An Wuju, with an expression that her views needed to be recognized. In order to satisfy her, An Wuju also nodded. So, like you. She stood at the door of room 5, if you don't want to go to your room tonight, you can only go to number 4 or 6, and the next night only, go to number 3 or no 7. An Wuju continued. That's right. Zhong Yuro stood in front of door 5 thinking, but according to the regulations, you will be forced to fall asleep at 12 o'clock, even if you go to other people's rooms. What can you do? Is it hard to do something indescribable? Obviously it's a dirty joke, but Anwuju's expression in front of him is completely unwavering, and his eyes are even pure. He repeated Zhong Yuro's words with a little questioning tone, indescribable. After saying these words, the 7th door suddenly opened from the inside. It's Shen Ti. Shen Ti came out wearing red headphones, shaking his head. Zhong Yuro was frightened by him. Why are you here? Shen Ti pointed to the number 7 on the door and his name, reached out and opened his door handle, opened the door, closed it again, then walked to the door of door 5, reached out and twisted it the door handle, which could not be opened, turned to face the two of them, raised his arms and crossed his chest, making a no gesture. Zhong Yuro narrowed her eyes, turned her head to look at Anwuju, her voice was low. Is this man dumb? Anwuju shook his head and directly pierced, he, just spoke. Shen Ti, who was wearing a mask, tilted his head to Anwuju and put his hands on his hips to show his dissatisfaction. Zhong Yuro ignored his actions and continued to ask, what did you say? Anwuju paused for 2 seconds, as if hesitating for something, but finally took a breath, put the wine bottle in his hand on the ground, raised his hand to cover his mouth. Ah! The author has something to say. Shen Ti, you really know when to come out. Shen Ti, I wanted to go to my wife's room, but I was told. Zhong Yuro looked at Anwuju, and then at Shen Ti's mask. You two play with me. No. Anwuju shook his head with a serious expression. Zhong Yuro looked at him suspiciously, Anwuju bent down and picked up the wine bottle just placed on the ground, only to find that he was holding a bottle of champagne. A little unbelievable, where did this come from? I don't remember the supplies. Anwuju pointed at Shen Ti with the bottle of wine, and said honestly, his. You dare to drink his, what if it's poison? Zhong Yuro almost rolled her eyes, feeling that this little white rabbit-like boy in front of him didn't look like the person Yang Ming said. Could it be a scam? Find a starting target, and then defeat each one. Anwuju explained, I only drank it after he drank it. Okay. Zhong Yuro understood and looked at Shen Ti, then where did you get it? The questioned Shen Ti took out the virtual panel, turned to the point exchange interface, swiped his fingers, found the same champagne, and showed it to them both. From his actions, Anwuju could see a hint of pride. Zhong Yuro's reaction was bigger than Anwuju imagined. Are you crazy? Everyone gets a redemption opportunity every round of the game, do you use it to buy wine? She glanced at the price tag under the champagne on the screen again, and wanted to pinch herself. This bottle of wine actually sells for 3,000 holy coins. I also got 5,000 coins in the last game. The price is so outrageous, why don't they grab it? After she finished speaking, she made an angry move. No, you can't lose your temper, it's not elegant. Shen Ti shrugged and slid his fingers casually, as if showing her other product interfaces. Anwuju paid special attention and suddenly understood why Shen Ti didn't buy other things, probably due to the nature of this game. The food and drinks on the product page showed that they could not be purchased, the only thing that could be purchased was this expensive wine. It's so expensive. He muttered to himself, and then took the initiative to hand the wine back to Shen Ti. If it wasn't for the injury to his right hand, he would have returned it with both hands. Sorry, I just took a sip. But Shen Ti only stared at his hand, then raised his head and crossed Anwuju, expressing refusal to accept it. It must be that he is not used to drinking, he is a real loser. Zhong Yuro shook his head and said to Anwuju, go ahead, you don't have any other supplies. Her tone made Anwujiao ponder for a while, like comforting, and a little apologetic. After finishing speaking, Zhong Yuro tapped Anwuju's cheek with her slender fingers. I just wanted to say, what's wrong with your face? It's so red and there are fingerprints on it. She got closer, and Wuju's skin was too white and too thin. I don't know how much force the other party used, the marks left are particularly obvious. Nothing. And Wuju shook his head slightly. Zhong Yuro didn't believe it, she raised her eyebrows, someone is bullying you. And Wuju did not speak, he stared at Zhong Yuro's face. He didn't say that it was not a show, but hoped to show his weakness and innocence in front of those who had already targeted him. Her face seemed to show resentment and loyalty, but he was not sure whether this woman could be trusted. But if the current perception is really quantified into a scale, the trusted side must have gained a little more tilt so far. In the end, An Wuju did not respond to Zhong Yuro's words, but asked another question, why did you guys enter this game? Zhong Yuro glanced at him and corrected, it's not you, it's us. Because of An Wuju's statement, she seemed to accept the possibility of this person's amnesia, her face relaxed, everyone comes in for different purposes, some are for money, and they want a lot. Money, some people just want to live in a wealthy area, to breathe clean air, and to see the sun. Others want to save other people's lives, save their own lives. She smiled, actually it's the same, it's all about satisfying her own desires. Help. This keyword caught An Wujiao's attention. He guessed that the purpose of his initial entry was to save the mother on the sickbed. It's just that he was a little surprised. He originally thought that many of these participating players would be forced to enter, but he did not expect to participate voluntarily. Is it myself at the time? Nowadays, the regular medical resources are astronomical for ordinary people. If the terminally ill mother wants to survive, she can only spend money, a lot of money. This may be his only solution. You know what? After I won the first round, I returned to reality, and I exchanged all my holy coins for bonuses, which was a full 20,000 yuan, and I used them to buy beautiful clothes. And had a great meal. Zhong Yuro's expression was not as happy and excited as what she said, that was the first time I had real steak, not cheap synthetic protein, but meat. I also opened a bottle of wine, poured 2 full glasses extravagantly, and poured 1 glass on the ground. She explained with a small expression afraid of being said to be wasted, give it to my friend. Sorry. An Wuju said softly. Zhong Yuro smiled, what are you sorry for has nothing to do with you. An Wuju asked again, can you return to reality every time the game ends? Zhong Yuro nodded, yes. But there are only 24 hours. If you don't return to the game cabin after the time has passed, you will be executed. She stretched out her finger and tapped her forehead, remember the man before the warm-up game, the same end. 24 hours. At least we can meet. Hey! Zhong Yuro put her arms around her chest and glanced at An Wuju's hanging hand, how did your injury come about, don't you remember? An Wuju shook his head at her. This is how tragic the last level was to get such a serious injury. The entire right arm was severely bruised, and the flesh on the right wrist was directly open. If it weren't for this metal skeleton, I'm afraid this hand would be gone. Zhong Yuro mentioned something, but made An Wuju ponder. If what Yang Ming said is true, he is on the same level as him, and he is the one who controls the overall situation to win the greatest victory, then why is he seriously injured, but Yang Ming is fine, even in a suit not a single bit of damage. This is unreasonable. But if what Yang Ming said was a lie, it would be difficult to hide the fear of himself in his eyes. When she looked up, An Wuju noticed Zhong Yuro's slightly narrowed eyes. She frowned and stared at her wrist, more precisely his mechanical wrist bone. The expression clearly shows something. But she quickly raised her hand, found a reason to diverge, then turned her head and said to Shen Ti, who had been standing by without speaking, by the way, I want to go to your room to have a look. She went to room 7, but couldn't turn the door handle. An Wuju calmly said to her, you forgot the rules. Yes, Zhong Yuro patted her head, you can't enter other rooms arbitrarily. Her strange behavior made the balance in An Wuju's heart tilt a little towards distrust. But among these people, he always thought that Shen Ti, who acted strangely and did not speak, was even less trustworthy. But at this time, Shen Ti didn't take a single step, just stood in front of him. And Wu Ju thought that he was already very tall, but Shen Ti was half a head taller than him. He was wrapped tightly all the time, and even his hands were always wearing gloves, only his neck was exposed. And Wu Ju suddenly noticed that there was a pattern on his Adam's apple, the sun totem, but the center was an eye. Hearing a sigh, and Wu Ju looked away and saw Zhong Yuro take off the roll bag that had been on her back. I can't give you materials, so even if it is a clear line, it is equivalent to courting death. Zhong Yuro said very realistically, but I can help you deal with your wounds, just treat it as a favor for you. She raised her lips and smiled beautifully, remember. The roll bag was opened, and it turned out to be a row of very complete tools, from scalpels to screwdrivers, and even pipe wrenches. And Wu Ju did not speak, only frowned slightly. When Zhong Yuro stretched out her hand to herself, and Wu Ju discovered that her left palm had been seriously injured and it was also artificial skin. The circular mirror in the center of her palm was embedded in the artificial skin. The metal ring and the edges of the pulled skin were rudely combined, probably because she disliked it, so she simply dyed the artificial skin of the entire palm fluorescent pink, instead creating some weird beauty. Why install a mirror? And Wu Ju asked softly. Because of beauty. Zhong Yuro took a picture of her left palm, how convenient. After she finished speaking, she put down her hand and took out a small bottle of spray wound disinfectant. I'm a prosthetic doctor, professional. Please bear with it. Although Wu Ju had already guessed it, he was still surprised by her candid help. Zhong Yuro sterilized Wu Ju's wrist neatly and muttered, this injury is really. If only there was a debridement micro-robot. Hey, masked man, she called to Shen Ti, found a small flashlight and threw it in his arms, do me a favor and take a photo. Why are you so white? Zhong Yuro lowered her head and stared at Wu Ju's forearm, I've been dead for 3 days and I haven't been so white. Shen Ti coughed in the mask, as if choked by Zhong Yuro's words, and laughed softly, just listening to the laughter, it didn't seem so strange. He turned on the flashlight and put it on Wu Jiao's wrist. After taking a picture, he shivered, as if he was frightened by the injury. After sterilizing the suture needle, Zhong Yuro pursed her lips, and her expression became very serious. There is no anesthesia needle, I will sew quickly. Yet. Thank you. And Wu Ju looked calm, and even focused on the process of being healed, watching how the fine needle pierced the skin, threading the needle to sew up the wounded flesh. Where's your own wrist bone? Zhong Yuro stared at the wound and stitched it finely, but asked about the innocent past, although he probably couldn't give an answer. I don't remember. And Wu Ju said. Generally people would not replace their intact carpal bones with mechanical ones. This operation is very dangerous. She sewed carefully, not wanting to leave obvious scars on the person in front of her. Unless. And Wu Ju asked, unless what? Shen Ti on the side stretched out his arm and waved it between the two, but his black-gloved hand was hidden in his cuff. Zhong Yuro raised her eyes and nodded, a disabled person. But soon, she denied the possibility, but your hand is not a complete prosthesis, the skin and muscle tissue are it is a natural growth, it is impossible to directly pick up a new one because of a severed hand disability. This is weird. What is this? Zhong Yuro opened Wu Ju's arm to check the inside, and found a very thin old wound, a slender scar with a slight protrusion, running up the bone. She rolled up her sleeves, the trace has been extended upwards. Let me see. She took Wu Ju's other arm and continued to check, then frowned and asked with a serious face, Wu Ju, you really don't have anything, remember? Do you know who you are and what your origins are? Wu Ju was sure that Zhong Yuro had discovered something, but he really had no memory. I forgot how I entered the game and what happened after I entered the game. But I have memories from birth to before I entered the game. I came from an ordinary background, and my mother raised me and my sister alone. Big. The education I received when I was a child came from my mother. Later, when I became an adult, I went to an ordinary university to study. When I was a sophomore, my mother became seriously ill. Zhou Yuro asked again, "What's the disease?" And Wuju tried hard to recall, and it seemed that he finally found an electronic medical record from his memory. Brain tumor. She has hallucinations and auditory hallucinations, and she is blind. Zhou Yuro fell into silence. You didn't have the money to treat her, so you came in. She came to this conclusion and stared at him suspiciously. You really didn't lie. And Wuju shook his head. Shen Ti stood aside and shook his head. I don't know if he listened to these conversations, but he was cooperating with the atmosphere anyway. But Nwugui was stunned. Just now, he suddenly heard a certain sound, like the collision of wind chimes made of seashells he had seen when he was a child, but it was very slight, almost inaudible. Following the voice, Nwuju looked at Shen Ti, who was wearing a mechanical mask. Shen Ti just lowered his head and played the operating table with shadow lights very seriously. Why do you think I'm lying? Nwuju asked. It's nothing. Zhou Yuro changed the topic. Fortunately there is this mechanical skeleton. This kind of synthetic metal has high hardness, otherwise your wrist will be useless. Zhou Yuro turned her head and grabbed Nwuju, which was intact. The hand that held his wrist, and his 5 fingers. Then she said to herself, if only I could just cut your hand open. As soon as she finished speaking, Zhou Yuro couldn't open her eyes due to the dazzling light. She covered her eyes with her hands. Why, masked man, I didn't say I have to cut it now. Shen Ti put the flashlight in his hand on Nwugui's wrist again. Zhou Yuro rolled her eyes. I just feel that his bones are not quite right. I want to see what's wrong, but now I can't scan. Although Zhou Yuro didn't say it clearly, Nwuju understood her meaning to some extent. My carpal bone is made of artificial metal, what about the other bones? My memory is probably also artificially cleared. Nwuju directly confessed his conjecture to her. Zhou Yuro raised her eyebrows, her expression seemed suspicious. The neurons in your hippocampus have been manipulated. She is a prosthetic doctor after all, she has seen all kinds of strange operations, so she thought about it, and said a possibility, maybe it was selectively removed, and then a new insertion was coded go in. Shen Ti on the side started to take a flashlight at the back of Nwuju's head, but Zhou Yuro called her back. She closed her tail, cut off the end of the thread with scissors, and wiped off the skin for Nwuju on the blood, and on some medicine. Does it hurt? Zhou Yuro asked. Give you a shot of endorphins. No, it's fine. Nwuju answered truthfully. The speed of his speech was still not fast, but he seemed very calm. Okay, that stuff is so expensive, I can't bear it. Zhou Yuro didn't know what to say. With this level of injury, the person in front of him didn't respond at all. Even without anesthesia, deep sutures are only slightly painful. Nwuju observes Zhou Yuro calmly and finds that the virtual machine interface in her brain is exposed. Behind the ear, the black carbon arc ring extending from the interface directly bypasses the right earlobe. Come down and put it on her head like a special kind of jewelry. Subconsciously, Nwuju looked at Shen Ti again, but he was wearing a helmet. Nwuju found nothing. Zhou Yuro found out his intention and told him directly, ours are all installed before entering the altar. No matter how good it is, it was uninstalled before coming in, and what is now is the virtual experience machine inside the altar. Speaking, she turned her head to look at the side of Nwujiao's ear, but found that unlike her own, there was no sensory hub ring on his auricle. Let me see, where is your interface? She muttered to herself, put away the tools and turned around to gently grab Nwugui's hair. Your hair is bigger than mine, it's still long. She twisted her hair with her hands, a little surprised. It turned out to be true. After speaking, she seemed to suddenly remember something. By the way, I just wanted to check it. Zhou Yuro turned around, pinched Nwuju's face with her hands, and tugged, and carefully observed the pores and tiny light-colored fluff on her face. Your face is also real, you didn't buy it. She couldn't help but sigh. Nowadays, there are too few natural handsome guys, and many have changed their faces when they are young. Is the face important? Nwuju asked. Zhong Yuro raised her eyebrows. Of course, what are you thinking about? She shook her head. In this world, violence, hallucinogens, and are all hard currency, and beauty is plain. Is it a kind of sexual ability? Especially natural beauty, those rich people hate to squeeze out the same cell face. Do you know what a cell face is? It is an epidermis cultured from human skin tissue. Make it up. In fact, the skin in the petri dish is called a weird, rubber-like. Speaking of our bank, Zhong Yuro talked a lot. But Nwugui didn't feel much about his appearance, and didn't think it was a rare trait. Zhong Yuro held Nwuju's chin, and looked at his face carefully, and came to a conclusion. However, with your face, it seems that the current technology cannot produce it. The skull, and the shape of the eyes, it's really nice. Shen Ti's flashlight swept across Nwuju's head frantically to remind Zhong Yuro that it was time to do the right thing. But Zhong Yuro glanced at him. Masked man, why are you wearing a mask? Could it be disfigurement? Nwuju also turned to look at him, only to see Shen Ti shrugging his shoulders, as if tacitly agreeing. There was some insincere pity on Zhong Yuro's face. I have good plastic surgery skills. I promise to make you have a good face. Although you can't become a handsome guy, you definitely don't need to wear a mask. And the price is fair, and the old man is not deceived. How about it? Think about it. When it came to money, Zhong Yuro's beautiful eyes began to glow. Shen Ti just shook his head and pointed the flashlight at Nwuju's head. Don't forget it. Zhong Yuro pouted. Instead of continuing to sell her plastic surgery techniques, she lowered her head and concentrated on checking the back of Nwugui's head. I got it. The two ports are located 1 inch diagonally above Nwuju's two ear tips at 45 degrees, hidden in the hair. A small square protrusion is the closing threshold of the liquid metal electrode. The virtual machine is different from ours, and the electrodes are also different. Why? She was puzzled and tried to open the closing threshold, but found that the entire virtual machine is currently in a state of terminating the program. I can't open it. Zhong Yuro tried using several tools, even with the forced open code, but to no avail. No. This startup program is a built-in encryption program. I have no method. Nwuju understood this. It doesn't matter, I'm in the altar now, which means it's working internally. Maybe some programs are suspended. Can't get it all done. Zhong Yuro is a little dissatisfied with this. After all, she thinks she is a prosthetic doctor with excellent professional ability. After thinking about it, Zhong Yuro clapped her hands. By the way, I can help you install a sensory hub ring, and your lack of pain right now might have something to do with that. She took out a metallic space gray streamline ring from her tool bag. One end was stuck in the pinna of Innocent, the other end of the magnetic induction device chain in his outside the hidden interface. This is the latest generation of space silicon carbide, which is much easier to use than what we install in our heads. It was originally reserved for myself. It is installed first, it will not take effect in the altar. If you can get out of this round alive, then I will load you in the real world, and your bones will have to be scanned again. Nwuju also expressed her gratitude to Zhong Yuro. I will help you. His tone was gentle and sincere. Zhong Yuro was not used to it yet, but just smiled. Then there is no need, just give the money, 10,000 holy coins. Zhong Yuro just said casually and stretched out her hand. After all, 10,000 saint coins are enough to smuggle half a box of space silicon carbide materials in the real world. Who knew that when Nwugui heard it, he immediately pulled out the panel quietly, and then entered Zhong Yuro's name on the transfer interface, confirmed his personal information, and transferred the account without hesitation. On hearing the prompt, Zhong Yuro realized that the speed was so fast that she, a miser, was speechless for a while. What a happy day, I met a pair of prodigals at one time. While sighing, the fourth person broke into the lounge porch. It was Wu Yu. You, why are you all here? He held the door with his hand, hesitating whether he wanted to come in. Wu Yu glanced defensively, and suddenly spoke very bluntly, bringing up topics that several people had never discussed, or even avoided discussing. Will you allies with Yang Ming? Zhong Yuro was stunned for a moment, then laughed. Children are just direct. I'm not a child. Wu Yu stood up straight, frowning slightly. I'm 16. Pfft, okay. She had to raise both hands in surrender. You are not, you are not. However, this kind of direct expression of wishes to strangers is not mature. At least he won't ally with me. And Wu Ju said slowly, no matter what position. That's true. Zhong Yuro nodded. Yang Ming may be desperately calculating now, thinking about you. Wu Yu looked at Zhong Yuro and asked, what about you? Why do you please and Wugui so much? Could it be that the red line you connected is him? Zhong Yuro showed a puzzled expression. What nonsense are you talking about? Wu Yu pointed to the tool bag she was carrying. I saw it all. You sewed the wound on his hand. You really have a crush on An Wu Jiao. I have a crush on him. Zhong Yuro sneered. I still have a crush on you. Watching them play small things, An Wu Ju actually has the illusion that this is not a survival game, but only for a second. Although he was not used to it at first, he now understands the rules of the game. Zhong Yuro patted him on the shoulder. I tell you, you can't give up so easily. If you really lose your memory, then you are new to this game. I can tell you with all my mercy. You can't be soft-hearted when you participate in any game in the altar, or you will definitely lose. An Wu Ju raised the corners of his mouth slightly, but you can't be reckless. Zhong Yuro was stunned for a while. It's true. But no matter what game, if you get the worst card, if you don't resist in the worst situation, the situation will be even worse. How can a worthless person survive? An Wu Ju did not speak. It is indeed difficult for a worthless person to survive. But worthless people can hide from intrigue. Especially the invincible and dangerous person in the legend. Once he loses and loses again, and retreats again, his opponent will relax, his self-esteem will be greatly inflated, and he will be ignored as a worthless person. This is the only way to get out of the house now. To win, you must lose. Why don't you talk? Zhong Yuro sighed. I have never seen a guy like you who can't count people at the altar. Don't look at Yang Ming's own health bar. Very few, can't duel you directly, but he will definitely use other people. Before they finished speaking, a harsh alarm sounded in the room, and then a familiar holy sound appeared. The player initiates a duel. Shen Ti, who was standing by the side, whistled, but it didn't sound, a little embarrassed. No one thought peace would be so short-lived. Initiator, Robber Roll Lu Jingui the challenger, the intern and Wu Ju. The duel will start in 3 minutes. Please come to the duel room on the right side of the living room. The challenger must not refuse the duel, otherwise the current round of blood will be directly deducted. It came. Wu Yu stared at Zhong Yuro, and said after a few seconds, crow's mouth. Zhong Yuro choked on his words. No, who would have thought so fast? It must have been ordered by Yang Ming. Wu Yu made a judgment without hesitation, but soon he frowned again, puzzled by the development of the situation. But you don't even have the supplies. No, a duel doesn't make sense at all. An Wu Ju's face doesn't change much. He is more like a well-trained artificial intelligence than a human being. In many cases, looting lives is more meaningful than looting supplies. An Wu Ju thought, in this situation, there are 3 possibilities. The simplest one, Lu Jinggui's black line is connected to himself. The second is more devious. Yang Ming is the one who cursed himself. The last black line didn't even connect with him, but simply hated him and wanted to kill him. According to this situation, it is more like the third type. Because if it is the first 2, I am afraid that when the system assigns the red and black lines and dual rules, they will start. Anyone who knows that the object of his curse is Enwuju cannot wait until now. It just so happened that the person who initiated the duel may not have thought that he was the target of Enwugui's curse. When the rules were announced, the system had randomly assigned the red and black lines to each of them. Enwuju, who opened the game panel at that time, saw the red line connecting the wanderer Lao Yu, and the black line the robber Lu Jingui. Fortunately, he also has skills that can be swapped. If you don't have this ability, it will be difficult to make a comeback. In the past, the door of the rehearsal room was wide open and everyone was present. Enwuju walked in. The room was bigger than he imagined. The 4 scarlet lasers suspended in the middle surrounded a huge area, and there were 4 ceiling lights on top. The whole room had no other lights. It looked very strange. Like a bigger boxing training ground. A short column stands outside the area with a circular button above it. Enwuju felt very familiar with such a scene. The teeth and hands trembled uncontrollably again. Wu Yu stared at the dual threshold. Since the total number of health bars is calculated, the lesser will lose. Why do you have to come to the dual threshold for a duel? Other people have to stand in line. It seems that the person with the highest health bar will win, but even if Shen Ti with the highest health bar stands up, he will encounter 3 or 4 people on the opposite side. Adding up, the health bar is also higher than that of him. Zhong Yuro sneered. Besides, if you only calculate the duel and no one is injured, the cost of the duel will become very low, and it will be better than who will pull people. If you hit your body, you will bleed, and you will need to consume materials, so everyone will stand in line with caution. Lu Jingui was standing on the left side of the ring not far away, and seemed to be ready. Even the blind eye showed a fierce light. In terms of physique, Enwugui is lean, slender, and at a disadvantage in weight, but in Oneonon melee combat, weight often provides an overwhelming advantage. Because of the lack of food and water, the energy bar on his head has begun to decrease, but the other party is still full. Not to mention that Enwugui is now seriously injured in one hand. The holy tones appeared again. The duel rules have been explained before, and I remind you again that the duel results of each player in this round of the game will not depend on your own strength and skills, but on the number of blood bars on both sides. The side with the most total health bars will win the duel. You can also choose to sit on the sidelines. The side with the lower total health bars becomes the loser in the duel and will lose 1 health bar, and the winner will remain the same. The duel ends when the winner depletes one of the loser's health bars. This is a confrontation where the strong are stronger and the weak are weaker. For Enwuju, for Lu Jingui, who has 7 health bars, if there is no one on his side to increase the number of health bars on his side, this will be a losing game duel. However, during the game, your pain will be infinitely close to reality, so your skills and strength will determine the damage you cause to each other in the game, and the damage is irreversible. Only spend materials for pain relief and treatment. Don't worry, even if you use deadly methods such as slitting your throat to cause injury in a duel, it will not be really fatal. As long as there are blood bars left and enough materials, you will not die in the game. If you stand in a team, you will participate in a duel in person, and you will be injured. This setting will only make other people stand in the team more cautiously, and no one wants to consume a lot of medicines. The wrist is still shaking, the wound has just been sutured for less than a few minutes, and it will definitely split after a lot of movement. Enwuju began to earnestly calculate that the balance in her account was enough for Zhong Yuro to perform several surgeries. Lu Jingui has entered the laser ring as required. There is no right to refuse, Enwuju followed suit. The laser lines of the arena expanded upwards and downwards at the same time, forming a scarlet wall of light enclosed on all sides, trapping them in it, and the dim room became very strange in an instant. Before the duel begins, you will be provided with a randomly assigned weapon. A square blue holographic projection appears in the middle of the duel threshold, with characters representing 2 people on it, and a blank weapon bar below the characters. Like a slot machine, the blank column scrolls, and at a certain moment, the rotation begins to stop, and the weapons in the column gradually stop. And Wooju stared at the spikes slowly moving up on the blank column. This is a nice weapon, but it eventually moves up and disappears. The weapon column is frozen, and finally it is a red cross, as is Lu Chinggui's. There are no weapons for this duel. Are there any other characters joining the duel? Please choose the faction you want to go to and bet all the health bars on the character panel for 1 minute. This minute was extraordinarily long, and the duel room was eerily silent. And Wooju didn't stand in the stands, he stared at Lu Chinggui's mutilated eye, thinking about the layout after losing the duel. Time passed by and no one made a choice. Everyone chose to sit on the sidelines, but this was the best possibility in An Wooju's expectation. No one joins, An Wooju has 3 health bars, Lu Chinggui's health bars, 7. The duel will begin after a 5-second countdown, please prepare. The holographic projection instantly transforms into a huge, oppressive countdown number, from 5 to 1, which makes people hold their breath unconsciously. Start now. Blood bars instantly appeared on the top of their heads, and Wooju only had 3, and Wooju's muscles were still paralyzed and did not wake up. But in just a second or two, a huge fist had already smashed into his face, and the attack was fierce. His reaction was subconscious, and he didn't even know why he could make such a quick reaction. Lu Chingui felt a little unbelievable about An Wooju's dodging. In reality he was a gangster and had countless street fights, so it's not enough to say that he is experienced in this Oneonon fight. 4-2. But that's it, every one of his fists was dodged by An Wujiao. Every evasion moves with wind. The anger ignited his desire to win. Lu Chingui couldn't bear the opponent not making a shot at all, and even used such a fast speed to predict his shot and avoid it directly. I told you to hide. Lu Chingui roared, turned, and raised his hand to punch, but the next second his arm shook. An Wooju recognized his fake movements. The moment he could move his body, he suddenly felt wrong, the muscles of his whole body seemed to be frozen. Can't move. Lu Chingui raised his leg and kicked An Wooju's abdomen hard. Before the pain could drown his body, he fell back and leaned against the cold, hard, light wall. This will not work. He tried to strike, but the spasms of his muscles got worse, and even the flesh around his cheekbones was twitching for no reason. After half a second of distraction, the injured arm was stepped on by Lu Chingui, unable to move. Blood spreads from the soles of the feet. Lu Chinggui's fists smashed up one by one. Although it was a norm's duel, he wore a metal exoskeleton on his knuckles, and attacking his already seriously injured body was a foul. The falling fist is like an unstoppable torrential rain. Blood is falling so fast. Lu Chingui is really ruthless. Wu Yu under the stage looked at the rapidly shortening blood bar on An Wuju's head. He stayed where he was, unable to lift his hands. He has post-war stress disorder. Zhong Yuro muttered to herself. Wu Yu heard this and took a step closer to Zhong Yuro. What did you say? Zhong Yuro glanced at it and said in a low voice, stress disorder. He had been slow to respond before, his speech speed was also very wrong, and his hands were shaking with convulsions. I thought it was a psychological disorder. But his dodging movements just now seem to be trained, and when faced with a duel, his muscles are tense, twitching and mentally weak, and it is very likely that he has experienced a brutal war. She paused, or kill. But post-war stress disorder has a completely different manifestation. Wu Yu listened, and at the same time he was jealous of this person. There was a trace of sympathy. He turned his face sideways and looked at the two people on the stage. This is a passive battle with no chance of winning. As if driven by muscle memory, An Wuju tried to block with his uninjured hand, but compared to the opponent's attack that was so violent that he couldn't penetrate the needle, the twitching of his muscles created a greater obstacle for him. The most terrifying thing is that under Lu Chinggui's boxing, An Wuju seems to have hallucinations. He felt his blood flow backwards, and his beating heart became a hard lump, and he was about to peel it out of his throat. Shards of memory flashed back in front of her eyes constantly, sharp knives stabbed into the waist and abdomen, broken arms and legs, drug intubation. The pain in the hallucination is more real and difficult than reality. You hide? I'll see how you hide. Lu Qingwei pulled his long hair back, forcing Enwuju to raise his head. He laughed cruelly and contentedly, stood up, held Enwuju. Wuju also picked it up, grabbed his neck and faced Yang Ming's direction. Is this what you call a ruthless character? Lu Qingwei smiled contemptuously and spat on the ground. I don't think so. Enwuju was overwhelmed by the constant flashbacks of hallucinations. The tight muscles made him unable to do anything. He could only watch the man in front of him consume the last bit of blood on the top of his head. It's all over. Now he only has 2 health bars left, the same as Yang Ming. The duel is over. Shenjian announced the result without emotion. The character robber wins, and the loser in turn loses 1 health bar. Please leave the duel threshold for both characters. Lu Qingwei obviously did not expect it to end so soon, and even felt that it was not enough. Enwuju is someone who was marked as a game target by Yang Ming. He described it as a bug in this survival game. To be able to knock down such a person, Lu Qingwei gained unprecedented vanity. Surviving in this game is nothing. He wants to become a master who can dominate and dominate. I knew that my life would not be so fast, so I should torture you slowly. He threw Enwuju to the ground, clapped his hands, raised his head and left the duel threshold. Enwuju fell to the ground, raised his hand and wiped away the blood slowly. He tried to control his abnormal muscles, pressed his less injured hand to the ground, and struggled to his feet. Wandering, pale-faced Enwujiao walked out of the duel threshold. Although the duel was more difficult than he thought, at least the first step of his plan was successful. No one spoke in the arena, just like when the duel started, but the expressions on everyone's faces changed. In the quiet room, there was applause. It's Yang Ming. He clapped his hands with a smile, walked from the dark corner of the room to Enwujiao, and admired his frustration with great satisfaction. Enwuju, after the last round of the game, what happened to you? Yang Ming raised his eyebrows, his slender eyes looked at Enwuju. Look at what you look like now. Well, I'm afraid you'll never go back to what you were before. He always remembered how he spent the last round of nightmares that lasted for 10 days, how he knelt down to Enwuju like a dog but was pushed out by him, and finally managed to survive and kill a people stole his points to live to the end. Now this devil-like guy actually said that he had amnesia and didn't remember anything. Obviously won the game unscathed at first, but entered this round as an innocent weakling who was seriously injured. It's all a lie. You said it, the altar is a Darwinian Colosseum, and if you are weak, you should die. Yang Ming held back his anger and pinched his chin. Then should you follow your own creed and die? For a moment, Enwuju felt very wrong. The enormous tinnitus prevented him from escaping from the hallucination. On Yang Ming's lean face, he saw the dry trees of Siberia, the weird Western old sayings, the bottles and jars soaked with organs and prosthetics on the black market, the blank, spotless circular experiments room, a place with no windows, like a prison. An unfamiliar blue sky on a huge monitor. He woke up knowing nothing, before he could save his mother. Do you really want to die like this? Enwuju's absence made Yang Ming feel humiliated to a certain extent. He sneered, to be able to pretend to be like this is enough to bear the burden of humiliation. Could it be that you really forgot everything? The wounded Enwuju oozes blood from the corner of his mouth, and only said in a weak voice, I really forgot. You can kill me if you want, but I'm dead. You don't have to. Win to the end. What did you say? Yang Ming grabbed his collar and dragged him to him. Enwuju lowered his voice and said softly, the mantis catches the cicada, the oriole is behind. Yang Ming was quiet for 2 seconds. The heart struggled for a while for a short time. Enwuju, who entered this round of the game, became taciturn and said very few words, but every sentence made Yang Ming unable to feel at ease. Is he testing his determination to kill him? Have you already found a partner? Prepare to go straight to the top after killing him. This game is not about force. It depends on who gets the highest survival score in the end, who can keep the person he secretly loves, and get rid of the cursed person. This is the best solution. Anwuju means that he has already found the person who can get the highest score under the optimal solution? Who? Zhong Yuro? Or Winnow, or Wu Yu? He didn't find the answer, and couldn't find the answer, and in a fit of anger, he suddenly pushed Anwuju to the ground. Although there are doubts in his heart, he can't let him go so easily, at least torture him. Otherwise it is so. Yang Ming squatted down towards Anwuju, stared at his face for a while, then turned his face and smiled and suggested to others, "Let's test if he is really lying." Winnow asked, "How to test?" "We continue to duel, anyway, Anwuju only has 2 lives left, I don't believe that when he is about to die, he can still hold on. Take a 10,000 steps back and say, Anwuju, really, if you lose your memory, you are not at a loss. You lose a dangerous competitor, and you get more supplies. More cost-effective transactions." The dueling room was quiet, and no one objected to this cruel plan. Wu Yu raised her foot and was about to move forward when Zhong Yuro next to her grabbed her arm. She silently shook her head at him. Lu Jingwei has made it clear that he has joined forces with Yang Ming, and other people may have already reached cooperation with Yang Ming in the dark. Target. Anwuju fell to the ground with blood sticking to the side of his face. Because of the flashback of his memory, his senses became blurred, and he could barely hear Yang Ming's humiliation. "Your face should be very popular in the real world." He patted Anwuju's face with his withered hands. "What a pity, listen. It is said that after brain death, people are completely dead. If you become a vegetable or something, you can still be an obedient puppet, don't you think?" Hearing this, Lao Yu stopped. "Yang Ming, you are going too far." Anwujiao's consciousness returned vaguely and heard their conversation. "What? Are you sympathetic to him? Why didn't you stand up and pledge your health to him?" Yang Ming stood up. "I just wanted you to consume him the next blood bar. The situation is changing too fast." The spear suddenly turned to other people. Wu Yu felt that something was not right, and said to Zhong Yuro in a low voice, "Could Lao Yu be the person that Yang Ming cursed?" But Zhong Yuro shook her head without hesitation, and paused for 2 or 3 seconds before saying the reason for her decision. "It's because Lao Yu stood up." She added in a low voice, "If you want to let Lao Yu shang, you just want to test whether he can stand in line, and only those who are swaying will become his abandoned sons." Wu Yu observed her expression and said nothing. Faced with Yang Ming's decision to throw one person again, the others remained silent. Even against an opponent like Anwuju who only has 2 health bars, no one here wants to enter the duel threshold with him. Even if he wins, he will make enemies for himself. Yang Ming took the initiative to choose one, but instead made others feel grateful. "Wait a minute." Yang Ming suddenly changed the conversation. "Since you are so opposed to it, then I will give you another chance to choose the faction you want to go to, and you will not be needed this round." He seemed to say every word carefully, but in fact it was not too different from a threat. After he finished speaking, he turned his head and looked at a dark corner of the duel room. "How about letting Shen Ti come on?"